What would happen if Deku had the Ghoul Quirk? Let's find out. But before we start, please hit the subscribe button, like the video if you like this story. Also consider sharing this with your friends, this really helps. Let's start. Something is missing. Deep within, a part of himself is gone. The boy trembles, his body no longer feeling the same as it once did. It's not just that something was taken from him. He feels violated just as much as he does deprived. A thief had stolen more than just his dignity from him. It's as though he had his kidney carved out in his sleep. He's fragmented, broken, damaged. He had never known the true definition of those words until now. He realizes with an incomprehensible dread. What he could be dreading, what could possibly be worse than what he feels right now, he doesn't want to even imagine. He stirs, trying to put action to his thoughts. He tries to move, at least a fraction of an inch. However, there's a strong resistance keeping his hands together behind his back. The same constraining force is applied to his legs in front of him. He wiggles in place and comes to the conclusion that he's sitting down. He's bound to a chair. The boy tries to wrench his arms free first, but he feels narrow straps dig into the flesh of his wrists in protest. There's no breaking free. No getting loose. He hangs his head in sullen defeat. How he lost the will to fight already, so quickly. So easily. He knows for sure now that something was stolen from him. The boy swallows the pit in his throat, the emptiness within echoing the collision the pit makes within his stomach. All of his strength has been sapped from him. He has no stamina. There's a lack of aroma in the air, the smell stale. He can't even hear the room's ambience. He tries calling upon his predatory instinct to escape. No animal, monster or not, can be held in captivity without repercussions. But no claws nor fangs are a part of him anymore. A hand, calloused and large, reaches through the darkness. The boy realizes then that his eyes hadn't been closed or covered. The void had merely been the room's shadowy state. His vision just never adjusted. He shooks away from the sadistic touch as best as he can, but the rough fingers grab his cheek. Poor boy. You must be hungry. A voice just as callous as it is sardonic beats at the teen's eardrums, harsher than any physical beating could. The boy's eyes widen in water as he strains to see in the dark. Yet, he doesn't need to see to know who it is that he's in the company of. He recognizes the voice clearly. A voice that makes his ears on the verge of bleeding. A sensei. The boy whispers words of acknowledgement in full-fledged terror. All for one in the flesh. The man who can. The captive's breath hitches in his throat. The man who can take other people's quirks for himself. The boy realizes then what had been stolen from him. He had always fantasized the non-existence of his ghoulish quirk. A life where he had been born with a different quirk or quirkless. Other times, he had dreamed of a world in which he had never been born at all. So why he feels so distraught and overcome with despair by the loss of his curse, he doesn't know. He reaches for the clawed hand of the ghoul, but doesn't receive any requited touch. Akatani Mikumo, who he had crafted as his new identity, doesn't exist anymore. Tied to a chair in the presence of the world's most powerful villain, is just useless quirkless Izuku Midoriya, a long-forgotten footnote. All for one's fingers drag across Midoriya's frightened face. Then the hand they belong to recedes back into the darkness. The good doctor will tend to your diet. The heinous villain holds light humor in his tone. Midoriya shakes when shivers run down his spine in response. The boy shakes harder, flinching roughly, when he catches movement in his peripheral vision. A glint in the shadows draws his gaze. Circular glasses. And a lab coat. A doctor, just like All for One said. The man is of a portly and short stature, balding with a bushy mustache. Midoriya watches as his elder walks out of sight. The tap of shoes is the only indication of where the man resides. Midoriya fixates on that noise. The doctor is behind him now. He can hear the rustling of a fabric. Then, a touch. The doctor is grabbing his wrist. Not too roughly or forcibly. Not like All for One. The touch is tender. Cautious. Careful. Calculatively careful. For a fleeting moment, Midoriya actually believes that the doctor is going to undo the restraints. But then, he feels something cold clench onto his left index finger. The hard press is metallic, Midoriya deduces. It's a tool, like a wrench or pliers. Midoriya sits up straight when he realizes what's about to happen. The tool tightens just like the doctor's grip upon receiving resistance. No. No. And then, Midoriya's pleas morph dramatically into a blood-curdling cry when he feels his finger being crushed by the metal tool's strength. The pressure increases, breaking bone and closing around flesh. Opposing ends being pushed together crushes what's in between. The process is slow and agonizing as the single digit is chopped off. Midoriya thrashes in the chair that he's bound to, more so from the torture being inflicted upon him than to escape, but doesn't accomplish anything other than rougher treatment from the doctor. His pinky is next, the tools bend on the brink of the finger's knuckle. Midoriya screams at the top of his lungs as the tool carves into his flesh, easily breaking past the skin and tearing into tissue. The bone snaps like a twig, and the pinky is severed. A searing hot sensation spikes from the cut points and spreads into his full hand. Warm blood pulls out and drips to the floor where the fallen fingers lay. A phantom pain lingers from where the detached digits originally resided. The boy yells as loud as he can again, tugging desperately with all of his might to shrug the doctor off of him. Merciless. Relentless. Onto the next finger. This one is cut at the bend, just short of the knuckle. That hurts more. The bone joint there shatters under the crushing force of the torture instrument, tiny shards splintering as the tiny limb gets amputated. His begging hysterical and hoarse, has no power in preventing more spillage to continue growing that puddle. Each finger shares the same treatment. Until all 10 are removed. They split and sever, bending in directions that they aren't meant to twist or turn. Each one torn off from an unnatural angle, the amputations aren't exactly clean cuts. Sometimes the doctor tugs with the tool, ripping the fingers free from their sockets, before completely slicing them off. Every abnormal removal contorts and disfigures what remains of Midoriya's blood-soaked hand. He gasps and wheezes while trying to breathe through intense sobs. The dismemberment begins to numb now that it's finished. Spittle spills from his quivering lips, streaming down his chin with his tears. His crestfallen face raises when he sees the doctor walking around to his front. He holds out his hand, in between two of his still attached fingers, one of Midoriya's detached ones. Whimpering, glancing between the severed digit and the doctor, the boy begins to realize what's being requested of him. No. Not asked. Ordered. With his quirk removed, his taste palate and cravings have returned to normal. And yet, Midoriya timidly tries to take his own finger with his mouth. The doctor practically shoves it down the boy's throat. Midoriya gags at first, but knows better than to spit it out. He almost vomits. But he clenches his mouth shut, teeth clacking together. He's breaking out in a sweat as he tries to resist his acid reflux. The boy fiddles with the finger using his tongue, like playing with food that he doesn't wish to swallow. Watery eyes close as he tries to visualize anything other than the texture that he tastes. He forces himself to bite down. Chewing his finger is like gnawing on a piece of tough meat. But the harder he clenches his teeth, the softer it gets. Remnants of bone crunch under the pressure of his jaw strength and warm liquid oozes out. A metallic copper taste floods his mouth that makes him bite down harder. The fingernail pops loose and slides down his throat. He grinds his back fangs together to tenderize the flesh of his finger, before swallowing that too. The doctor waits patiently for Midoriya to finish cannibalizing a part of himself, before holding up another finger to repeat the process. Fresh tears retrace old ones as the boy opens his mouth to accept the offering. The doctor slides it in slowly this time, sadistically savoring the teen's humiliation. A smirk furrows the stout man's bushy mustache. Midoriya's blood-stained teeth gnash together with his pinky in between. He medicates the small appendage like it's a bite-sized snack. This time, he chews a lot harder and faster to get it over with. His tacibits sting from the rapid rush of blood. A noise rises in his throat that's a cross between a moan and a groan. Satisfied for the moment, the doctor stops feeding Midoriya his own fingers, much to the boy's relief. That solace is extremely short, however. The doctor bends down, rebrandishing the metallic tool he was using earlier to cut those fingers off. Midoriya can't see the torture instrument now that it's in front of him. No longer left up to the imagination, he can see the craftsmanship intended for splitting and gripping. Itcher stains the sharpened ends of the tool like rust. Midoriya looks down to see the doctor reaching for his bound and exposed feet next. Panicking, Midoriya curls his toes in an attempt to resist what's about to happen. He shakes his head frantically in denial, and his body twists in a mimication of the movement. No. 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 His desperate shouts do nothing to help him though. The doctor forces Midoriya's big toe to uncurl and places it between the shears of the cutting tool. Cold steel sends a sharp stab into the boy's foot before it can even actually draw blood. The metal severs his flesh and begins sawing off the toe just like what had happened to his fingers. Midoriya's body releases various liquids as he undergoes the process of torture. Snot streams from his nostrils and tears pour out from his eyes. Spit flies out of his mouth with every agonizing scream that echoes throughout the dark chamber that he's in. Blood splashes across the floor with each toe that's chopped off. The torment is too much for him to endure that he winds up pissing himself, urine running down his leg and mixing with the rest of his DNA spillage. The foul odor mixes with the smell of his intense sweat, clothes soaked and stuck to his body. Midoriya's feet reflexively twist in an effort to avoid the doctor's touch. The restraints around his ankles dig deeper into his skin, sawing just the same as the torture tool. Festering flesh begins swelling, extremely inflamed. And Midoriya feels it all. His mind processes the pain for what feels like an eternity, all 10 toes taking a long time to remove. The boy's heels dig into the floor as his feet continue recoiling from the pliers that turn and snap his bones. But to no avail. The final toe bends upwards as a tooth's broken off from the foot. Midoriya's rising scream matches his slow climatic removal. Midoriya's head bends all the way back as he releases a full-body wail. Then, it slumps forward. His chin rests on his damp heaving chest. His hair is matted to his forehead and face, hanging over. His shoulders roll forward as he tries to sit up straight but fails. He feels as though he's on the verge of passing out. He's surprised that he hasn't already. Nausea creeps up from his abdomen to his head, rattling his brain. His mind is swirling, and his vision grows darker than it already was. You may not rest yet. But the deep demanding voice of his sensei doesn't allow him to slip into unconsciousness just yet. The procedure has only just begun. A tiny sting in his arm has Midoriya drawing his gaze back to the doctor. Through obscured vision, splotches of color bouncing around the black chamber, he can see that he was poked by a needle. Whatever was injected into him by the syringe only worsens his state. The energy in his system significantly drops like a sugar crash. Why are you doing this to me? Midoriya rasps. That same large calloused hand from before reaches through the shadows once again. This time, Midoriya has no fight left in his system to reckless from it. Before, you were nothing but a stray. Then you became housebroken. All for One's palm covers one of the boy's eyes. I wish to now make you greater than both. My personal attack dog. A shock of electricity runs through the boy's system, supercharging him in an instant. There's a burning sensation that spreads throughout his entire body at once. It jumpstarts his heart, blood flow fluctuating. The touch shocks his brain and restores what had been missing. The eye that's left uncovered bulges as it stares into a darkness that begins to creep into his sclera. The pupil shrinks and burns bright red like a fire that's just been set. His mind that had been shattered peers through the cracks of his eye like a mirror. His ghoulish instinct returned to him, his scream becomes a roar. He calls upon his returned power, flexing his arms and legs to break free of his bindings. But nothing happens. All for One releases his grip as he explains, the doctor has injected you with a serum that diminishes your RC cells. Your quirk requires such substance that it will take you a lot of trial and error to adapt to. The ghoul looks down at his feet, noticing now that his toes are taking much longer than they should to regrow and heal. The flesh is fluctuating as it tries to repair the damage that's been done. Through repetition, this process should theoretically cause a quirk evolution. The doctor tacks on his own explanation behind the torture that's being inflicted. Intense stress or emotional catalysts has resulted in a phenomena called quirk awakenings that I would very much like to manifest within you. The ghoul growls as he twists his wrists in a continued attempt. He can still taste his own blood in his mouth as he swallows his saliva. Shall we continue? The doctor goes around Nakumo's chair to get at his fingers again. As promised, he plans to repeat the procedure of amputating the appendages. All for One's hand comes through the shadows again. Sparks sprout from the ends of the villain's fingertips as they reach for the ghoul. Akatani Nakumo yells as his face is obscured, and his body is drained of its energy all over again. The blood in his system boils before flash freezing. The dark void of the room is reminiscent of how he feels without his quirk. It had been an extension of himself. A part of his identity. The diminishment of his RC cells had seemed so prevalent before that he'd forgotten about his aching wounds. He'd almost forgotten what the cold steel pressed against the skin of his fingers felt like. All for One's hand lingers over the boy's face, holding it up in an iron grip. The villain's sleeve rustles as something crawls beneath it. A centipede. The insect skitters out with its many legs, looping around its owner's wrist and then across his hand. The boy wants to pull away and resist, but his sensei's aura warns him not to. Visions of his own death flash through his mind. Drowning in his own blood. Choking on the red liquid until he suffocates. The centipede crosses the threshold between All for One's hand and Izuku Midoriya's face. Midoriya trembles as the elongated metameric creature crawls across his cheek. He feels every tiny leg that treads his skin. When the insect reaches his ear, its preformal spines tap the lobe in order to feel out the area. Midoriya opens his mouth, but his breath is baited. Then the centipede enters the canal. He screams. He yells. The centipede crawls into his ear, and he can no longer resist his desire to let loose. All for One releases the grip on the boy's head, allowing Midoriya to swing and shake it haphazardly. The insect doesn't come out. The age-old villain watches as the doctor begins cutting fingers again. The boy's expressions shift drastically as he twitches in his chair. A smile comes over All for One's face. You've got to break a mind before you can repair it. He remembers being barefoot like he is now. His feet had ached for a different reason then. Glass shards from broken bottles and back alleys had dug into the soles. The coarse pavement pricked at his skin. Now, his feet are numbed by the lack of toes on them. A completely different development. It's no comparison. But to a child who had been babied by their mother, back then was the worst of times with the worst of pains. Living on the streets by himself was nowhere near as awful as now. All for One may have been right that he was a stray. But it was a short-lived period of time. After he had run away and adopted a new identity for himself, he took to hunting vermin. Not rats. Mice scurried away into small crevices much too quickly for him to catch during the level he was at back then. But raccoons and possums. Critters that would dig into dumpsters and trash cans, larger prey to snatch in his fangs and tentacles behind restaurants. Those were fair game. He was ripping out the intestines from a rodent one night when he met the man who had given him his apartment and job at Antiku. The man's hair was graying, and he had to use a cane to walk with his limp. But he was strong. Big broad shoulders and muscle structure of a hero, the kid in the alley took caution. The man's left eye was completely scarred over. He had years of experience on him that the ghoul didn't have back then. The man's name was Iwaguro. He had been the vigilante, knuckledister. And he just so happened to wander the same alleys he would patrol in his prime, still watching over them. The Guro took the homeless child into his home. He overlooked the boy's quirk. When it came to food, the Guro had the ghoul eat the fingers of criminals as a multitasking interrogation tactic. The ghoul still eats fingers now. Just not of his own accord, though they're his own. It was a good deal during those days. The Guro was like the father that the boy never had. But it didn't last forever. One night, the vigilante bit off more than he could chew. He got ambushed and outnumbered. Knuckledister fought them off as much as he could for as long as he could. He may have been old, but his punches still packed a punch. He may have been slower because of his busted leg, but he could still dodge their attacks. Until he couldn't. His side got torn open. Then his shoulder. The boy, as young as he was, feeding on only scraps, was unable to resist. It was a repeat of what he had done to his mother. He lost control completely. A primal state of savagery put him into an instinctive mode to kill and eat. The ghoul may have torn apart and devoured the criminals, but he had also ripped into the man that showed him kindness. The boy was overcome with grief. The Guro had welcomed him into his home and cared for him with no judgment. And like his mother, he repaid that kindness with evil. From that moment on, the boy closed himself off to anyone and everyone. The Guro had left him a home and job to lay low in, so he took to being a recluse. He shut out the world with books and fictional stories. The only times that the ghoul would venture out was to honor Guro in what little way that he could, by limiting his meals and killings to criminals as a vigilante. Akatani Mikumo took to patrolling the routes Knuckledister used to, and henceforth, the Tokyo ghoul had made his home within the hunting grounds he had claimed. Mikumo disrupts his own memories with a yell that strains his vocal cords. The agony that climbs from his feet to his head is unbearable that he needs some form of release. Sour stomach acid burns his already flaming throat as it gushes forth like a volcano eruption. Mikumo vomits all over himself, only some of his inner contents landing on the floor. Through strained vision that eases in and out of focus, he sees what looks like his toenails and fingernails mixed into the bile. His head throbs so much that he clenches his eyes shut. He can feel it crawling around in his brain. The centipede destroyed nerves and cells, eating him from the inside. His memories haunt him, coming and going. The day he bit Koch-chan. The night he ate his mother. The night he ate a Guro. The look of betrayal on Todoroki's face. Mikumo screams. His mental fortitude is beginning to break again. But any time that it does, the doctor reminds him of how to retain his sanity. What is 1000 minus 7? Math questions force him to stimulate his mind. He stays mentally aware, constantly feeling the pain instead of trying to ignore it. He remains consciously engaged throughout it all, making him painfully aware of the constant pain cycle. It keeps him alive. It keeps him mentally stable. It keeps him from becoming like the Nomu. Genetically altered, engineered, and enhanced. Their broken brains are exposed at the base of their skulls. They float in cylindrical tanks filled with a preserving yellow liquid, awaiting the time they are needed to be released from their pods. Failures. Unable to think for themselves. Powerful, but empty slabs of meat reduced to cannon fodder. He had been moved. His Achilles heel had been severed so he couldn't flee. Unable to walk with cut tendons, he was dragged and forced to crawl. A bloody trail made the path from his torture chair to a torture table. There, he was strapped down and plugged into various monitors to watch his vitals. Shock therapy. Electrocution. Different frequencies of voltage would make his quirk factor spike and drop exponentially. The sparks would also stimulate the centipede, its writhing and aggravated claws ripping at the ghoul's brain. Mikumo retches as his pants are removed. He thinks that after all this time, finally, they're going to give him a change of clothes. But his body was less naive than his fractured mind. The doctor brandishes the pair of pliers he uses to remove the boy's fingers and toes. The torture tool then goes for his reproductive organ. Mikumo shrieks, thrashing and tugging at the restraints around his wrists and ankles. The chafing due to his resistance pales in comparison to what happens below. When he's brought back to his chair, his healing factor does nothing to fix his posture for hours. He's whimpering in an undignified state, counting backwards of sevens from 1000, muttering the numbers to himself. The regrowth of his body parts pushes pus out and clears infection, but doesn't stop the burn. Tears drip to the floor with a mixture of blood, rewetting the dried stains from the previous times he'd undergone this same process. Meanwhile, Katsuki Bakugo sits also bound to a chair. Though, minus the torture. He's in the company of more accommodating villains. The group surrounds him, varying from casual poses to stances with their arms crossed. Though the brash blonde refused to speak with any of them. Not without speaking to one specifically first. When Bakugo demanded, "Let me see Izuku," none of them knew who he was talking about. It was only through trial and error did they eventually deduce the member of the group, avoiding the UA student must be Izuku. Akatani Mikumo pulls his mask off so that he can look his childhood friend in the eye. Despite being a clone, he has all the mannerisms and memories to be anxious during their reunion. Finally done being a coward and come to see me man to man, huh? Bakugo barks at the familiar boy. He looks him up and down before softening his angry expression. You kept me waiting days, dork. Sorry, Koch-chan. Mikumo awkwardly glances around the bar. All the other villains are watching with curious gazes, especially Tomohiro Shigaraki. The boy's clone sighs to himself before taking a chair to sit across from the blonde. It's been a while, huh? He lets out an unamused huff next. Where the fuck have you been? What the hell are you doing here? Bakugo begins spitting out questions that have the other boy looking ashamed. Especially when the final question is, why didn't you come back to me? Earning a flinch as though it were a verbal blow. Before Mikumo's clone can give any answers to those inquiries, the leader of the bunch stands up from his bar stool to intervene. He's with us now. You should join too. The whole point of Bakugo's capture had been to convince the boy to join them. Tomohiro Shigaraki believes their connection could be the key to getting what he wants. I keep telling you. You can shove your offer and go to hell. Bakugo snaps at the blue-haired villain viciously over being interrupted before redirecting his attention to his reunited childhood friend. Why would the Izuku I knew link up with a band of misfit villain one-ups? At that, Mr. Compress steps forward. We apologize for the rather forceful measures taken to get you here. We need you to understand that we're no mere thugs working in the name of aimless evil. Not in the least. It wasn't by accident that we spirited you away. We all have a story to tell, but the bottom line is that we all suffered. The villain leader retakes control by dismissively waving off Compress. Mikumo, or Izuku, has suffered too. Himiko moves closer to the clone of Akatani, wrapping her arms around a single arm of his. Hey. Why is he calling you Izuku? She keeps her voice down to a whisper. Later, Akatani returns her gaze apologetically with the promise of explaining things eventually. Even for a clone, he feels the same guilt the original version would. Boy, I asked you a fucking question. But he has to deal with Koch-chan first. Bakugo looks between Himiko and Akatani, expecting answers. He's right. The clone recalls the ridicule over his quirk and the other difficulties he had to face. Society did this to me just the same as it did to them. That's bullshit and you know it. Bakugo growls out through clenched teeth. Mikumo's eyes lower and see that the bound blonde's fists are in a similar state. Maybe, is all Akatani can say in response to that. Suddenly, the sound of a rapping at the door draws everybody's attention. Nobody was expecting the knock, let alone any visitor in general. Pizza. Let alone a delivery driver. Did someone here order a fucking pizza? Shigaraki shoots the group a glare, but none of them fess up. Well, other than twice being twice. I did. Hell no, I woulda got takeout. He earns a sharper stare from the villain leader. And then, All Might smashes the wall down with the door. We're here. He announces his arrival through the self-created entrance. But he's not alone. Branches snake around the room, wrapping around each of the villains and capturing them. Kamui Woods crouches on a stack on crates, using his quirk to subdue the group. The Adabi's blue flames start to ignite as a counter to the wood. However, Flat King is another hero that makes his presence known. The blood manipulator hardens his plasma to reinforce the flame user's imprisonment. Kurogiri. Shigaraki calls for warp support next. But Edshot takes out the bartender before he can use his quirk, moving faster than the speed of sound. The villain group are completely outclassed. All Might stands at the center, his gaze meeting Akatani Mikumo's clones. Recognition crosses the hero's blue eyes, and he opens his mouth to speak. But the Tokyo Ghoul unleashes his Kagyun predatory organ, shredding Kamui Wood's branch like processed paper. Don't try it. All Might moves just as fast as Edshot did. A big burly hand snatches the ghoul by his much smaller arm. In an effort to escape, the clone contorts to dislocate his shoulder. Instead, Akatani's arm breaks. And gray gushes out instead of blood. Izuku. Bakugo stares in shock as he witnesses both his childhood friend oozing away, and the heroes having come to rescue him. Akatani. Himiko shrieks in horror and confusion too. I don't understand. Shigaraki fidgets in his whittinger strings. His bloodshot eyes land on Twice as he wonders. Where is the real Tokyo Ghoul? In that same instance, eggs at the centipede had laid dormant in the original ghoul's head hatch. Before the eggs hatched, the ghoul underwent one final removal. A decloin. The predatory organ that resides within the base of his back flourished in a frenzy. Each red limb flailed haphazardly, lashing out violently with a mind of their own. However, the futile attempt to preserve power and dignity did nothing but prolong the inevitable. The Kagyun had been severed, cut through by an ability from one of All for One's stockpiled quirks, none of the doctor's tools enough to do the trick. Then, just as he had been forced to feed on his own fingers and toes, he was also compelled to devour his own tails. The direct consumption of his RC cells implanted through those appendages triggered the stimulation of his quirk. Simultaneously at the moment the centipede's abnormal legs hatched. Rather than spawning a plenitude of offspring, the insect had been altered genetically to produce somatic mutations from its germ cells. The ghoul's regeneration begins to coincide with this amplification and the formative stage of RC cells, making a repeated web complete a more compact bond to a fixative state. What erupts from the base of the ghoul's back is a new and improved predatory organ, the Kakuja armoring enveloping the flexible limbs. Each fold of black shielding hitches with pointed forcipules per segment, red liquid flows streaming beneath the protective covering. Trailing out from behind the ghoul are a collection of centipede tails, much bulkier than the previous Kagin. The base coverings click and close as they slowly twist around in an entrancing spin. All for one grins ear to ear, a white-toothed smile. Marvelous. Simply marvelous. Admiration in his tone over the success of the ghoul's experimented evolutionary cycle. I do believe that you have outdone yourself, Doctor. The stubby scientist stares in equal fascination, captivated by the fruits of their labor. He hadn't expected the result to be so extraordinary. Not to undermine myself, but I should perform a few tests to ensure it all went accordingly. He snaps out of his entrancement with the eagerness to have a closer analytic study of it. But it's the room that replies, quaking in response. Dust dribbles from the foundational structure, weakening. A distant boom draws the doctor's gaze. The bar in which the underling villains reside is lit up like a holiday in red and blue lights. It seems I have business to conduct elsewhere. In the meantime, continue your research. All for one senses the situation without seeing it for himself. And he warps himself away, leaving the doctor alone with the ghoul. The ghoul is curled in a ball, eyes clenched closed. That entire time, his body had been submissive. The coiling tails had been absent-minded. The doctor turns his attention back to the boy, clearing his throat and pushing his glasses up his nose for a proper adjustment. The room is colder than it was before. The drop in temperature must be the reason why he's shaking so much. Surely, the boy can't be the reason, he thinks to himself. When the ghoul's eyes snap open, flaring red within dark voids, the doctor reconsiders. At the bar, All for One makes his arrival known. Nomu are transported from their preservation tanks, no longer needed to be reserved for a time of usage. They vary in form, shape, and size. One with chainsaws for arms cuts through cops. Another tackles Endeavor. All for One walks through the havoc undisturbed, or crossing the street and entering the bar. Kamui Woods, Ed Shot, and Vlad King fall to their knees immediately. The intimidating presence is enough to make them gag on their own blood. Only All Might remains standing, though not without shaky knees. All for One. He growls through gritted teeth in recognition of his old rival. The sinister force wears a special mask to compensate for the need of life support machines, free to terrain the grounds. Come to kill me a second time, All Might. The villain greets the hero with a presentative spread of his arms to show that he's very much alive. Or shall I be the one killing you? His fingers start to fold in preparation for an attack. All Might's eyes broaden in anticipation. Run. All Might tries to warn the others of just how powerful this man truly is. But it's too late. All for One devastates the area with a mere snap of his fingers. All the number one hero can do is make the judgment call to save one person. He chooses Bakugo, still just a kid. He shields the blonde boy with his muscular body and takes the brunt of the blow. Blood seeps out from the corners of the hero's mouth, but he wipes it away to hide any signs of weakness. Then he spins back around to face the imposing suited figure of his arch-nemesis. You've gotten weak. You would have rescued everyone in time during your prime. All for One taunts his rival with a tone of amusement. Out from the corner of his eye, All Might can't see the charred corpses of his allies. He yells in a fit of rage, charging the villain responsible. Wasting no more pretenses, the battle begins. All for One spins his still raised hand, calling upon the raging fires surrounding the area with pyrokinesis. The flames flash focus to a centered ball, combining to make one big blast. The inferno burns brightly as it's launched at the hero. But All Might intercepts, pausing his rush to bring his own hands up, and claps them together as hard as he can. The collision causes a shockwave, the gusts of wind booming with a thunderous sound as the flames are dispersed. That same air begins to vibrate before it can disperse like the flames. All for One utilizes the noise provided by All Might's power, weaponizing it and redirecting it as a sonic boom. The air pressure is an aftershock of the sound being centered. All Might brings his hands to his ears next, covering them as tight as he can to block out the deafening noise. Even with that defensive move, sound seeps in and causes his ear canal to bleed. The lack of fire and heat in the air starts to become known. The temperature drops rapidly, controlled by All for One. All Might gasps, a breath of condensation, his massive body beginning to frost over. Before it can completely be encased in ice though, he flexes his muscles and makes the hardening shatter. His body freed up, All Might takes the opportunity to go on the offensive. He closes a hand into a fist and brings it down. His punch hits the ground, making it shatter like glass instead of concrete. The unstable surface would trip up anyone other than All for One. But for the villain, all it does is give him a proper push-off to begin levitating. The monstrosity is now airborne. All for One whips an arm back and then swings it forward, fingers jutting out in a crazed spiral. All Might leaps back and watches as they morph into a reptilian form. A giant serpent bares his fangs, striking just as quickly as a real snake. All Might catches the bite before it can close on him, holding back its jaws. The bite force isn't strong enough to rival All Might's power, but it does force him to dig his feet into the ground for a good grip. The floor starts to grab onto All Might's legs, holding him just the same as he's fighting back the snake. He glances down to see the rubble shifting and covering his feet, but he can't move without compromising himself to the reptile. He has no choice but to pull in separate directions with his arms, snapping the serpent's jaw. It slinks to the floor, dead. Then All Might trips his feet free. Meanwhile, the ghoul is about to rip into the villainous doctor that caused him so much grief. A centipede limb crawls around the mad scientist, preventing his escape, pointed pedipalp stabbing him in places to keep him still. Gigantomachia. The doctor squeals in agony as he writhes with pain. His call for help reaches the radio he's plucked from his lab coat. And the ground gives in. Then the ceiling. Then the walls. Everything collapses as something colossal rises up from the depths of hell. Debris rains down as the ghoul leaps from rock to rubble, Doctor screaming in the centipede-modified monster's grip the whole while. A body as jagged as the stone that's being broken climbs out from the enormous pit that's been made. The ghoul's limbs rattle in warning as the doctor is raised higher up. Let him go. The living calamity booms through protruding canines. The scale of the eco monster is that of a skyscraper, towering over the buildings that haven't been demolished by its arrival. The ghoul's response is tightening his hold on the doctor. The hardened limb wrapped around the scientist's waist constricts, snapping the man's spine. His limbs burst next, cutting off an inescapable scream from the doctor's blood-gurgling throat. Sharp legs tear at the bent flesh, ripping it apart and exposing raw muscle tissue. Behind fog lens, the doctor's eyes widen until they pop out of his skull. Watching from close by, Pro Hero's best genist and Mount Lady are appalled by what they're witnessing. The more experienced hero recovers first, stumbling over his words only slightly, as he shifts his focus from the ghoul to the giant. That one looks like a job for you. But the blonde heroine shakes her head, mouth agape as the ghoul sprouts more centipede limbs. Each additional appendage is larger than the last, dark armoring reminiscent of a dragon's scales. Risen up to the same height as the giant, the ghoul becomes his own imposing monster. I don't think I'm the only one who can increase their size. She murmurs out in horror of what's transpiring. Earth plates shift from the blows being exchanged by combatants in the Camino ward. Panicked crowds topple over one another, the stampede stepping on the fallen and stomping them to death. Officers who attempt to evacuate the crazed civilians get knocked over and trampled on as well. Mayhem moves the screaming storm into traffic where cars are running people over or crashing into one another, in an attempt to also flee. A newscopter captures the chaos as it flies overhead, reporter clinging to her microphone with a sweaty shaky hand. The pilot tries not to fly too close to the destruction for fear of being caught within the blast radius. The cameraman zooms in on the ground, lens focusing. Two figures are across from one another in one of the many craters that have been made. All Might primes himself to take a mighty leap, planning to jump for his enemy, but pauses when a resounding roar encompasses the battlefield. The hero whips his head in the direction of what sounded like an angry scream, searching for the source. But smoke begins to envelope his surroundings. Another one of All for One stockpiled quirks. With his environment concealed, All Might is forced to ask, "What was that? What did you do?" instead of seeing for himself. All for One replies, "My latest creation. I think it's time you finally meet another renowned monster." The tittering of a centipede's legs just as loud as the ghoul. Armageddon overtakes Camino ward. Buildings reduced to rubble and air turned to ash, only fire rises. Any civilians that were in the area are either buried or crushed. Cars lay overturned and on their sides. Anguished yells of the dead haunt ground zero, cries morphing into monstrous roars that continue to shake the trash terrain. Forcipules skitter up the leg of the giant villain that had appeared on sight not too long ago, venomous claws of the equally massive centipede stabbing into the behemoth's thick hide. The predacious arthropod wraps itself around the thigh of its prey, constricting to cut off blood flow to the limb. Black armoring pads each segment bearing of the much longer appendage belonging to the ghoul. The giant tries pounding at the second centipede ties itself around one of Gigantomachia's arms, hindering the large villain's movements even further. The Chilpoda squeezes at the hulking Goliath's elbow, tightening until the bone joint bends inwards. Flaming plots of collapsed structures flicker out from the updraft that the giant's yell causes. A third centipede wraps itself around the villain's waist, adding friction. And a fourth snakes around the giant's neck, cutting off oxygen to the monster's throat. Gigantomachia's screams are silenced as he gasps for air. He tries using his free hand to pry the centipede off, but the predatory appendage of the ghoul has already sunk its forcipules into the villain's flesh. But rather than hung up by a noose, the death trap hugs the giant down. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. Gigantomachia digs a grave, a crater of his own creation, making his tomb as the rubble buries his body. A timbering tree would be putting the collapse lightly. The draft of dust and debris that flies up into the sky reaches the clouds, where the news chopper currently resides. Fog fills the air and conceals the vision of the helicopter pilot. The system beeps haphazardly when the rotors get resistance in the direction that they're spinning, causing the aircraft to hitch up and down. Everyone aboard grabs onto something tight and screams. Pebbles pelt the hull and the windshield, leaving dents in the metal and a few cracks in the glass. The pilot pulls hard on the joystick, trying to regain control of the aircraft. It takes a few spins, but the helicopter stops shaking and comes to a fine altitude. Though the sensors are still going haywire and everyone's vision is still obscured from within the equivalent of a sandstorm. Everyone okay? The aviator glances over his shoulder to check on the cameraman and reporter. The cameraman is about to speak, but covers his mouth before he can to prevent himself from puking instead. He uses his other hand to give a thumbs up regardless. The reporter gives a shaky nod alongside him. A moment passes before the pilot returns the gesture. But then, the reporter's eyes broaden and she points, drawing the aviator's gaze back towards the front. Look. Is that a kid? She sounds as panicked as she had looked. And disturbed. Indeed, levitating like some sort of hanged man in the midst of the dust cloud is a young boy's silhouette. But as they draw closer, they realize what they're seeing is no ordinary child. Attached to the young man's midsection are tentacle limbs sprouting from his lower back. Those limbs are one and the same as the giant centipedes that had brought down the giant villain. The helicopter occupants realize too late what they're flying into when one of the monstrous appendages rises from beneath them like a living dragon that has also taken flight. Pull up. Pull up. The cameraman shrieks alongside the reporter as they hang on for dear life. The aircraft bugs as the pilot tugs on the joystick to steer it away from the enormous centipede, barely unscathed by the close call. As the news chopper ascends, the members on board get a good view of what's below and through the foggy dust. The giant villain is still pinned down, struggling to pry himself free with one hand and pushing with his feet. He digs into the ground, legs shoving his massive body forward. But all the giant does is further deepen his own grave. The centipedes that have the behemoth bound continue constricting tighter and tighter, armored shell versus scale plating. The giant is losing. The camera captures the devastating scene, broadcasting the footage through a live studio feed. Families watching at home are on the edge of their couches, paling at the shocking sight. But certain viewers in particular are especially grieved by what they're seeing. Itachi Shinso runs a hand through his puffy violet hair while exhaling in disbelief. He recognizes the ghoul at the epicenter of all those centipedes swarming the sky. From within the dorms of UA, Shoto Todoroki also watches with a frown and clenched fists, emotions high from witnessing who he had believed to be his friend being a part of two major villain attacks. But not everyone watches with disdain or anger. Some watch with sorrow. Like the girl that had been rescued from her captors by the one that the world is ridiculing as a monster. Yuri watches with watery eyes as her hero is called a villain. Her current guardian, Shota Aizawa, tears his own gaze from the television to her and hurries to wrap her in a hug. He's not the best at comforting someone, but considering the way he himself feels watching this turn of events, he's in need of a good cry too. Kyuzan Yashimura, the ghoul's former boss, takes a long sip from his cup of coffee. It's a slow night at Antiku. Without his star employee, business just hasn't been the same. The television puts him in a worse mood, his drink also turning bitter. Yashimura grabs the remote and switches it off. Then he grabs his coat, flicks off the lights, and closes the cafe. All Might watches from the actual warzone itself, physically present. He's disturbed by the cataclysm to say the very least. But he has his own battle to fight. But jumps right into a maelstrom of solar water risen and controlled by All For One. All Might fights the cyclone, using his signature Detroit smash to clear the weather. The punch is powerful enough to help him land safely, but only momentarily. All For One is relentless, hurling steel beams and chunks of wrecked cars using a level of magnetism. The hero dodges and weaves, but also confronts some of the metal pieces head-on. The front somersault to build up momentum and air pressure results in a California smash. Scrap metal scatters the area. All Might clears the football field distance between himself and All For One in an instant, winding up for a curl. All For One says smugly before the force field expands and pushes All Might back. Once again, the ground is uprooted and rock crumbles. All Might staggers back, huffing heavily as he tries to recover from the blow. The villain's killing aura weighs on the hero, the crushing pressure that makes his muscles sore, and his core tingle in the base of his skull. Another shockwave crosses the expansion, and All Might braces for it. No time to dodge. He has to endure the force of the impact. Suddenly, an explosion lights up the sky with the color orange. All Might turns his head to see the news chopper was struck by one of the ghoul's limbs, back rotor burning as it spirals out of control. It's going to crash. All Might squats down, calf muscles primed for takeoff. But he's suddenly blindsided by something swatting at his face. It was in his peripheral vision so fast that he had no time to avoid it. A long limb with a claw at the end of it cuts across his right eye. The hero cries out and instinctively places a hand over the wound. His one good eye sees that the limb that cut him recedes back into All For One's hand. Keep your eyes on me, All Might. The villain continues taunting his opponent with a tone of amusement. All Might growls, vision in his damaged eye completely fading. It closes on its own, eyelids glued together by blood. But All Might is only momentarily hindered. He forces himself to push beyond his limits and moves as fast as he can to intercept the falling helicopter. It's just about to collide with a weak structure when All Might catches it in his bare hands. The chunk of metal leans against the hero and makes his back arch as he tries to fight its momentum. The top rotor spins still, resisting All Might's grip. While All Might is preoccupied with prioritizing a rescue, All for One begins prepping the fatal final blow. The culmination of powerful quirks transform one of his arms into a killing strike. Hypertrophy to enlarge his fist, another quirk that generates rivet-like growths, drill-like bone structures also applied, and several kinetic boosters combined with strength enhancers. Impactor coil and multipliers are added to the spring-like limb quirk to top it off. The crucial combination aims for All Might to kill him with his back turned. But one of the centipedes intercepts the strike, getting in the way. The armored scaling absorbs the hit, shuddering but not cracking or denting. Legs skitter along the ground before lifting off the earth to take to the sky. All for One retracts his arm so it doesn't get snared by the predatory pursuit. He's shocked by the interruption but only for a second. His pet project is clearly distressed, not in the right state of mind right now. The ghoul is running on pure instinct. And the ghoul's pure instinct is to kill. All for One generates a wall of flames to act as defense, trying to ward the centipede appendages off. All the fire does is irritate the crawling chilopoda. All for One. But the villain is forced to return his attention to his arch-nemesis when the hero charges once again. All for One curses under his breath. He had been too distracted by the ghoul's sudden intervention that he didn't put up his force field. He reacts to All Might's attack by intercepting it with his killing blow. Their fists collide, sheer strength disrupting the crater therein and sinking the surface even deeper. A sonic boom erupts from the power output. Blood dribbles down from All Might's knuckles, his fists still grinding against All for One's. The amount of effort that he had to put into that punch drained him. Literally. Half of the hero's body has sunken in, muscles shrinking and steam wafting off his skinnier form. The time limit of his power is starting to reach its breaking point. The reporter that the hero had rescued gasps when she sees what his true form looks like. The cameraman pulls back from the video recorder that he's holding, checking to see if what he's capturing is actually real. It very much is. All Might's true appearance is exposed to the world. Damn you. All Might growls through gritted teeth as he continues struggling against All for One's fist. Ashamed that you can no longer obtain the symbol of peace you made yourself out to be. Well, have fear then. Have fear. Because I'm here. The villain speaks with the voice of the devil with the accompaniment of a demon behind him. Where is your smile now, All Might? The ghoul has reoccupied himself with the giant, finishing the villain off for good. Devastating roars of distress beat on All Might's eardrums, the external cry of torment, sounding a lot like a vocalization of his inner feelings. It only gets worse when All for One continues to gloat. Perhaps this will provide some solace. Nana Shimura has a grandson. All Might's one good eye widens, and his name is Tomohiro Shigaraki. In that moment, the hero is just Toshinori Yagi, fragile and small. And he's always hated you like me. The weakened symbol of peace starts to fall as he's pushed back by All for One's mixture of sheer power and his revelation. All Might recovers, coughing on his own blood, but fighting back still nevertheless. His feet dig into the ground, and he pushes against All for One's fist again. His body begins reverting back to its missile form as he puts in overtime, and denies the villain's claims. You're lying. This is too good to be a fabrication. You know it's true because it's the kind of thing that I do. All for One counters casually in contrast to All Might's desperation. I've engineered the encounters between you and he like it USJ. You defeated him so soundly. You won, with a smile. So proud despite your ignorance. So sure of your own superiority. Toshinori becomes more anguished with each sentence, feeling the truth behind the words like their backhanded strikes. Who is superior now? All for One laughs gleefully. How dare you? All Might yells back in the villain's face. Blood and spit splatters against the scarring. All for One takes delight in his sworn enemy's rage, relishing in his anger and goading him to continue. I haven't seen you this angry since I killed Na. Keep my master's name out of your vile mouth. Toshinori's throat shouts in protest over his own, yelling as much as his arm groans in pain against All for One's. Katsuki Bakugo gawks at the entire exchange from where he's been knocked on his ass time and time again. He tried running in to help. He tried running away. Every time, the wind gusts or All for One's oar would put a stop to his movements. Not to mention whatever the hell his childhood friend has become. The blonde hero in training shifts his attention from his idol's battle to Izuku Midoriya's full-blown transformation into a ghoul. Centipedes went from restraining the giant villain to crushing him. Arms and legs bent inwards, the defeated Goliath may as well have been gift-wrapped and tied into a bow. Atop the now battered and beaten behemoth is the ghoul, back appendages encompassing him in a circular formation victoriously. Tears in his eyes, Bakugo clambers to his feet once more. But not to interfere or flee. to shout at the top of his lungs, as loud as his throat will allow, and as far as his voice will carry. Win, All Might. He screams for the number one hero to hear him. After witnessing the battles that had just taken place, he hates to admit not even he stands a chance, that only All Might can come out on top. Only All Might has a chance. The other 3 spectators capture the UA student's encouragement on camera before joining in. The pilot tosses off his helmet to be heard better. The reporter holds the microphone to her mouth. The cameraman tries not to shake the camcorder too much. All Might's ground teeth begin to upturn. He gives them his signature smile, albeit his usual pearl white stained red with blood. Of course. That's why I am here. He promises them victory despite his missile form collapsing. All that remains is the single arm holding back All for One's death blow. You're too weak. All for One activates another quirk that amplifies the power of his arm's force. Additional arms begin to unfold from the original limb, also pushing down. That's because I wasn't putting my back into it. All Might yells back while keeping his smile all the while. He gives it all that he's got. Everything that's left in the tank. From one arm to the other in one crucial swing. A power transfer from his occupied hand to the other. All for One had manipulated Nana Shimura's grandson into becoming a villain after killing her. He has stolen away that boy's life and now another. The boy ridiculed for his quirk, called a ghoulish monster, set on that path because of this one true monster. No more. All Might vows that he'll never allow this man to destroy anyone's life ever again. The whole color spectrum radiates from All Might's left arm to his right. Red arcs like an electrical surge, shifting to green and then sparking purple. His veins glow red and then yellow. He can feel the power of One for All's previous users, culminating for this singular moment, united. He calls upon each of them to come together and make a decisive attack. The arm holding All for One back breaks, becoming crippled, power leaving it in favor of the other. All Might's remaining arm bulks up, swelling in size and gleaming with energy. States of. All of the moves that he created are nothing compared to his finisher, Smash. The mask covering All for One's face shatters on impact. The scarring that had healed underneath reopens, muscle tissue and blood fresh. And the villain is carried down into the ground by All Might's most powerful punch yet. A cyclone comes forth, all of the wind channeling into that singular swing. Windows beyond the destruction site shatter from how far the sound carries when the head connects. And All for One is buried into the ground, a grave just for him. The last of One for All within All Might's system is gone. The red and blue suit of All Might hangs loosely from the skeletal frame of Toshinori Yagi, bloodied and tattered. He's just as worn down and bruised as the villain, the first time ever that the number one hero has been shown to sweat in combat. Ash and soot darken his face, splotches of dried blood crusting over his wounded eye. But the hero's single remaining eye still stares ahead, through the smoke, and at the Tokyo Ghoul. Toshinori's blue eye meets the red orb within the dark chasm. From across the way, they look directly into one another's souls, and acknowledge the damage that's been done without any exchange of words. The ghoul's weaponized limbs recede into his body, centipedes shrinking down to his size. He stands atop the giant villain the same way All Might stands over All for One. Neither of them make a move, but they agree that the fight is over, so that whoever does move first does not break the peace treaty. All Might moves first. He raises his unbroken arm up, high above his head. It's the stance he takes after every fight he wins. This is his final victory. The world sees him standing triumphantly in front of the only remaining threat. Until All Might falls over. In what feels like slow motion, the camera captures the hero's descent. The symbol of peace's legs give out. He drops to his side, arm outstretched, and dies. Rubble where the bar of the League of Villains once existed begins to shift. Slabs of cement and piles of brick topple over, so that Himiko Toga can crawl out from beneath. She coughs, a broken rib poking her liver. She's covered in so much soot that she's as dark as a shadow. Her hair's undone and matted to her face, caked in both blood and sweat. Through the locks hanging over her eyes, she sees the ghoul. Akatani. She calls out to him as she tries to stand up but topples over. She looks back to see one of her legs is broken. When she faces forward again, she sees that her shout got his attention. He's looking back. Behind her, more bricks shift and give way to other survivors. Tomura Shigaraki gasps for air, only able to get on his knees. Dabi and Kurogiri also pull themselves from the wreckage. The remnants of the League of Villains are in no better shape than the dead. But despite seeing that, the ghoul still turns his back on them. Himiko lets out a choke noise, watching his receding form as he leaves her with them. Akatani. She tries calling out again, but he doesn't stop and acknowledge her this time. Akatani. Don't go. Don't leave me. Himiko tries forcing herself to stand despite her broken leg, pushing off with the other. She hits the ground hard, scraping her hands and knee. Tears wash away some of the ash covering her woeful expression, as she wails her boyfriend's name a final time, Akatani. As she watches him leave, she has a feeling that's the last time that she'll ever see Akatani Mikumo. It's like he's somebody else completely. Across the way, Bakugo shares her outlook. There was no revival of his former self either. Izuku Midoriya truly is no more. Any reminiscence of then is gone completely. Now, he is just a ghoul. Above, the glassy sky breaks and rain begins to fall. Himiko's heart shatters too as she weeps. The setting sun glints off of his glasses as he watches the casket go down. Sir Night-Eye, All Might's former sidekick, stands beside the fallen hero's successor as the body is buried. Tagata, among the other funeral attendants, don't bother holding back their stream of tears or choking down their sobs. The burial ground had been turned into a monument, the symbol of peace erected as a statue in his iconic pose, as though he still stands victoriously. But the stone smile does little to comfort their mourning. The crowd gathering there still hold their own arms high over their heads anyways, candles flickering bright in their hands. The plenitude of little flames lights the area, orange glow, radiating a glimmer of the hope that can be found there. Just as many people place flowers around the grave, a massive garden offering equal semblance. Pink petals flutter in the wind, and red roses emit a vibrance like the fires that were lit. Parting gifts placed upon the ground weigh down goodbye letters and pictures that honor the departed. None of this was in the vision that Mirai Sasaki saw. Just the horror that had been televised. A bloodied and beaten hero, broken down to his last efforts. As predicted, All Might died giving it his all in a gruesome battle. He wants to be angry that he hadn't tried harder to prevent the outcome of his idol's death, or to weep in despair, but he's oddly more relieved. Relieved that despite the harsh beating, his partner can be laid to rest and honored in such a way. In all the hero's glory, All Might's much-deserved love and adoration helps put Night-Eye's grief at ease. Across the way, Sorihiko Torino hangs his head. He's also wearing a black suit and tie. The older man had already watched one of his apprentices die. Now he's lost another. Night-Eye wishes he could work up the courage to go over and say something, but he's too caught up in his own distraught emotions. He turns his gaze towards the sky, its reflection gleaming off his glasses. At least the weather is nice. At least it isn't raining. Sir? Tagata's voice draws Night-Eye's attention back to the ground. Through the lens of his bifocals, he can see the hero in training has stifled his crying. Night-Eye's heart bleeds for the boy, but he holds strong, not allowing himself to tear up in the blonde's place. He clears his throat, so that it doesn't crack when he responds, "Yes, Mirio." Bloodshot eyes that had once glowed so vibrantly like Toshinori stare lifelessly into Night-Eye's. It really does feel like all of his idol, his partner, his friend, is gone. Tagata helplessly, pleadingly asks, "What now?" Night-Eye is at a loss for words himself. Despite being able to see the future, he has no idea what to do. Though that doesn't stop him from racking his brain to think of what All Might would say. The symbol of peace had entrusted his legacy to Tagata, and it's up to Mirai to pass on that reminder. I'm sure what Toshinori would say. He removes his glasses to stare directly into the next one for all wielders' eyes. Is that your next? What comes next and who the next generation of heroes will face though, remains to be seen. The company building, Detnerate, overlooks the same orange horizon. The sun sets on the city in waiting. From that high office view, Riki Yatsubashi massages his chin in contemplation. With the fall of All Might, as well as All for One, there will likely be a power grab. As the leader of the Metal Liberation Army, and successor to Destro, he hopes that now is the most opportune time to strike and claim that high position for himself and his cause. The echo of footfalls alerts the conspiring villain to the presence of another. Much to his shock, the shared company is a boy in his teenage years. To be more precise, he recognizes the kid as the one from the news footage during All Might and All for One's final battle. Except, the unruly hair that had been as black as his uniform is now bleached to pale white. And the tattered ghoulish mask covering his face looks more fixed to his skin. "Hey Desro, you and I have a common enemy." Even the boy's voice sounds more matured, more convicted to his own cause. The wind's sharp sting against her face, the way that it blows through her hair and brushes against her clothes, it doesn't feel the same anymore. There's no exhilarating rush of adrenaline as she bounds from one roof to the next. She feels the strain on her ankles when her feet make an impact. The full weight and pressure of bending her knees to push off and continue moving extracts a heavy toll of oxygen. Without the proper energy to endure this type of physical activity, the harsh reality of how much effort the body requires to pull it off really settles into her flesh and bones. In the back of her mind, the blonde wonders if this is some form of depression that has weakened her. It's not the first time that she's been abandoned and left alone. But it is the first time that she's been unable to recover and bounce back. A flock of pigeons disperse from a nest that they've made atop a chimney as she sprints by. Feathers float gently down behind her as she carries herself from that building to the next. But her descent is not as soft and delicate. The girl's foot catches the ledge, and she flips forward, arms bent at the elbow to brace herself unconsciously. She instead lands on her side and rolls onto her knees, skin scraping off and exposing raw red flesh. The blonde hisses through her pointed teeth, seething in both annoyance and pain from making such a stupid mistake. Stopping, and so suddenly, has also taken the metaphorical wind out of her sails. As she had been exhausted and breathing heavily before, then now she's practically wheezing on the verge of comatose. A stray lock falls over her forehead as she wipes away a bead of sweat. She curses under her breath, damning everything. She's not sure whether she had been running toward her from something or what that would have even been, if anything at all, but now it's finally caught up. It's been a number of weeks now since her boyfriend disappeared. Not just days anymore. And he hasn't once tried reaching out to re-establish contact with her. To be fair, he must have been hurting just as much as her after the Camino Ward incident. It took the first week for her to recover and heal most of her injuries. But now, especially with his quirk's healing factor, she had expected him to return to her. Yet, he hasn't. She closes her eyes when tears threaten to spill, the waterworks brimming at the edges. She won't allow herself to cry. Not anymore. From up high, she can hear the hustle and bustle of nightlife below. Car horns honking. Trash bins being loaded. Pedestrians crossing the street. Families and friends laughing. That last one pulls at her heart just like the sole thought of her missing boyfriend does. Friends. They seem in short supply. She wasn't even sure she could trust Dobby anymore after what had happened. During their recuperation, the surviving stragglers of the League of Villains had a thorough discussion about the events that had taken place. Well, more so an argument than a conversation. Fingers had been pointed. Blame had been casted. It was a matter of who could shout profanities louder than the other at some points. And yet, the entire bull session replays in her mind as clear as day. Out of everyone that could have asked the question on all their minds, she hadn't expected Tomura to be the one who had addressed the matter. And he had put it so eloquently too. Shouted through his chapped lips was the brilliant formulated sentence structure, "What the fuck happened back there?" As always, Kurogiri scolded the man-child like the parental figure of the group that he is. Language, Shigaraki, the missing member of the team, had sounded more exasperated than usual too. Just enough to seem suspicious to Tomura. "Did you know anything about it?" Tomura spat like the drops of saliva were venomous. His hissy fit was much more than a tantrum that time. If everyone weren't still recuperating at that point in time, his rage would have no doubt triggered a fight of some kind. Instead, the danger simmered under the surface of angry expressions. "To what are you referring? The heroes?" "Of course not. Don't be preposterous," though Kurogiri had to mostly express his own frustrations through his tone, considering his face is pretty obscured by the purple smog enveloping his body. He meant Mikumo, dipshit. It was at that point Dobby ran out of patience and lost his own temper. Or in hindsight, it could have just been an outburst from the aggravation he had over having to re-staple his burnt and sagging flesh. The blonde recalls her own outburst being based on pure emotion though. She knows that for a fact. She had been pissed. "You definitely had something to do with Akatani. That icky grey goop was your quirk." She had accused twice of being involved with Akatani's absence, considering the way there had been two of the ghoul. Me? And twice had the gall to act innocent. Even behind his mask, he feigned complete shock when it came to being blamed. The psycho bitch is right. You cloned him, though she had been grateful at the time for Tomura backing her up. He had even gone as far to force himself to his feet, hands twitching at his sides with the urge to turn the supposed traitor to dust. Why? Tomura demanded answers for both herself and him. Likely he had been more so thinking of himself though. "I didn't." Twice denied his involvement with Akatani's absence at first, but was just as quick to fold and confess, "Okay, you got me." After being silent for so long, Compress sighed and finally chimed in. "Enough of this. Now that he's gone, I can tell you," and his input had silenced everyone, since he knew more than he had avoided letting on. He looked at Tomura while admitting, "Your master put us up to it." "Sensei." Tomura hesitated with that information. He was shocked. "Put you up to what?" So the blonde villainess had to step up and ask questions for herself again. When Compress had tried avoiding eye contact with her, she had gotten a little more assertive. "Hey. I'm talking to you." I had also known about the plan to swap out Akatani Mikumo, but Kurogiri had bailed him out before she could get stabby. That reveal had shaken Tomura even more, despite his earlier suspicions and accusations. Though it may have helped that Kurogiri apologized, "I am truly sorry for keeping it from you." But why? Tomura wondered aloud. Master deemed that the ghoul had a greater purpose, and all Kurogiri had divulged was that single elusive sentence. Hardly an explanation. What did he do to him? The blonde villainess had erupted again. She remembers pushing past her pain to stand up, challenging the others in an attempt to intimidate them. "Relax," but Dobby had stepped in to prevent a fight from breaking out. "He told me that your boyfriend would be fine. It couldn't have been that bad." He instead shifted the feelings of animosity towards himself. "You knew too?" The girl had felt betrayal at the revelation. Even if she hadn't been injured then, she would have still probably staggered and lost her balance. "I'm sure he had his reasons." Dobby hung his head in shame. "I know I had mine." "Why didn't you tell me?" The villainess couldn't help but wonder why her friend would keep such a thing hidden. "I told you. I had my reasons." And Dobby had snapped at her for it. The anger in his burning blue eyes had the same look as when he would talk about his father. She's sure that had been the reason to which she had referred. But still, she couldn't believe he'd sell out Akatani for his revenge. So the psycho bitch and I were the only ones left out of the loop. Tomura scoffed with disbelief as he looked around the room at the remaining members of the league. Practically all of them had betrayed him in his eyes. Tomura grumbled with a roll of his eyes. Brilliant. Kurogiri stepped forward and tried placating the league's leader. We shouldn't devolve into distrust amongst ourselves. The heroes delivered a major blow. And whose fault was that? But only received another fit of anger for his efforts. Tomura scanned the room a second time with wary red eyes. None of you are giving me any reason to trust you. Akatani was right. He and I should have never trusted any of you either. The former member of the league recalls that being the moment that she had decided she would leave them like her boyfriend had. Look. He'll be back. She had protested his claim, not knowing that Akatani had indeed left her. At that time, she foolishly believed he'd come back to her, and didn't hesitate to give him her defense. Now though. So it's settled then. We wait and see if the ghoul returns. Kurogiri took that opportunity to dissolve their first shouting match. He had opted for their recovery over arguing. Until then. We lick our wounds. And the rest is history. A few more arguments. A couple attempts to kill one another. Or, at least, the intent to. And eventually, she left them. She slipped away like a thief in the night. Now, here she is. Terraining the rooftops in search of nothing at all, running from nothing as well. Or, so she had figured. Something to flee from eventually does arrive. In the form of an underground hero. The flash of something yellow is what alerts her to the man's arrival. The villainess snaps out of her rumination when she senses that she's not alone. In the old days, she wouldn't hesitate to attack. However, nowadays, her fight-or-flight response leans more towards running. She still hasn't recovered fully from the Camino Ward incident, and she feels already worn down from parkouring, that getting into a brawl doesn't seem like a good idea. The blonde turns and flees without taking the time to see more than a glimpse of her pursuer. Wait. There's a shout behind her, but she ignores it and bounds across the gap of buildings. This time, she doesn't tumble or grate her knees. Her feet slap the rooftop that she lands on and carry her across to the next ledge. Behind her, she hears another pair of shoes smacking the roof surface. There's a few gasps of commotion from the sidewalks below. The villainess is giving the civilians quite the spectacle, crossing entire buildings in single bounds. A few lucky guys even get a glance up her skirt. Until she takes a sharp turn and drops into an alley in order to shake off her chaser. There's an electrical wire hanging over her that she has to twist and avoid before landing on the lid of a dumpster. More startled shouts from pedestrians come from behind her before she takes off towards a chain link fence. She doesn't bother looking back as she hops the gate and lands on the other side. She's sure that her pursuer is still on her tail if they are to immediate. So she tosses a garbage can aside to spill its contents in her path for extra measure. It won't stop her chaser, but it might slow them down. As well as the street intersection full of cars slamming on their brakes while she runs through. The blonde comes into another alley, this one with turns to take. After two, she starts climbing a brick wall by using its crevices as handholds. She thinks this is where she'll lose her pursuer. They'll likely run by and not know where she went. When she puts one hand over the other and scales the ledge, she isn't expecting to find the person chasing her already on the roof. He's an underground hero, waiting for her from a perch position on a ventilation system. Himiko Toga, Eraserhead, addresses the girl he's been following with a small nod. His capture cloth billows in the wind like a regular scarf. For a moment, Himiko thinks that he's going to use it on her. Instead, he says, "I think you and I need to talk." The blonde sighs, plopping into a crisscross seated position. Her legs finally gave out, unable to hold her up anymore. Sure. Why not? She surrenders with a tired tone. Sensing no hostility or intention to flee again, Eraserhead steps down from his own spot. He undoes his goggles while stating, "I've been looking for you." "To lock me up?" Himiko huffs. She has a poor posture matched by Eraserhead when he also sits down. The underground hero shakes his head, "Not exactly. This is more about Izuku Midoriya than you." The blonde blinks, showing no reaction to that name other than confusion. Eraserhead tries again, "Or as you know him, Akatani Mikumo." Akatani's real name is Isaacin. Himiko tests the name on her tongue by twisting it around a little. She's suddenly swept up by another wave of emotion upon remembering her boyfriend. She wishes he were here so that she could hate him for keeping his name a secret. Then she tease him a little before admitting that his real name is actually kinda cute. Then hit him again for leaving her and making her cry. "Have you been in any kind of recent contact with him?" Eraserhead puts drops in to fix his dry eye as he talks. "It's important that we find him." "I know that." Himiko can't help but snap at the hero. She's wanted nothing more than to find her boyfriend. She knows how important it is. She simmers down just as quick though. "It's just... No, I really haven't seen him." "That's a shame." Eraserhead shakes his head with a disappointed sigh. "I wanted to help him, and I believed you were the only one who'd be able to make that work." Himiko sits up a little straighter at that. "Help him? How?" His reputation has been more muddled than ever recently, but Eraserhead is as despondent as ever. The underground hero runs a hand through his long hair in exasperation. Despite some property damage and going against his probation, he helped bring down a villain, instead of aiding and abetting. I think that's worth something in court. I don't really know anymore. It might be futile. Himiko stares at the man in shock. And maybe even a little admiration. Akazuku. He was right about you. Her voice is just a whisper, but the hero hears her. He looks up to see the blonde's expression softening. You're one of the good ones. You seem to actually mean well. I don't think I've ever met a hero quite like that. Eraserhead offers her one of his rare smiles. Not one of the creepy toothy grins he uses to scare his students, but a sincere smile. There's a first time for everything. There's an odd sense of humor to his reply that lightens the mood as well. Himiko smiles back while realizing, hey, you're watching Eri, right? Yeah. Eraserhead cocks his head in curiosity as to why the blonde is bringing up the girl he's taken in. Can I see her? But it all makes sense when Himiko tentatively requests visitation. The hero remembers the times that Eri would call Himiko her big sister. I'm sure Eri would love that. He agrees to the meeting with a nod. But the mild happiness subsides when he thinks about the other elder sibling-like relationship Eri has. Do you think he'll ever come to see her again? Eraserhead has a distant look as he glances at the city line. Himiko already knows who he's referring to. I hope so. Himiko finds herself staring off in that same direction. She wonders if he's out there somewhere. Or if he's someplace else entirely. Me too, the hero solemnly sighs before his face furrows into a frown. He seems pretty busy with his new band of buddies though. Which catches Himiko off guard. Huh. Eraserhead looks back at her with an equal amount of confusion. You mean, you don't know the rumors recently? You don't? He searches for any sign of deceit or recognition to what he's talking about, but Himiko truly doesn't understand what he's getting at. What are you talking about? She asks with a hint of urgency to figure out what it is that she doesn't know. After leaving the League of Villains, he's made his own group, and Eraserhead drops a major bombshell on her. Her heart thumps in her chest as he elaborates further. It's an organization called Ajiri. The cracks and marble floors run with streams of blood. Corpses strewn around the facility continue to ooze more of the crimson liquid. These are the latest victims of Ajiri, the cult group called the CRC, which rejects any more physical abnormality mutation quirks. Pale cloaks have been drenched red, stained permanently. The League of Villains arrive much too late to have dealt the killing blow themselves. They walk into the aftermath, the stench of death hitting them hard. Twice lifts up the bottom of his mask, puking out his dinner. They had planned on pillaging the place for themselves, but they are now no more than scavengers here to pick up the scraps. Tamura scratches at his neck in annoyance. He had wanted to dust something. But he stops when he realizes that the massacre had saved him the trouble of having to exert himself. Admittedly, he's gotten lazier while in hiding. Biding his time has turned into nothing more than survival. He and his small band of misfits get by on scraps. They haven't been able to rebuild what they've lost. Today's just another day they've gotten lucky enough to take it easy. Or so he thinks. Until the set of double-chamber doors slam shut behind him, sealing him and the League inside. Dabi. Light. Tamura orders the fire user to spark a flame for them to see in the dark. Whoever slaughtered the cult group didn't leave. They're still here. Perhaps even, this whole thing had been a trap. When Dabi ignites a blue flame in the palm of his hand, there's just enough illumination for the small squad to make out something crittering around in the dark. Spindly legs skitter along the floors and up the walls before the group can get more than a glimpse. What was that? Twice shrieks like a stereotypical schoolgirl that just saw a bug. Quite. Tamura snaps with annoyance. He's had just about enough of Twice that he would turn the psycho into dust, if their group weren't already so low on numbers. Instead, as much as he would hate to admit it, Tamura knows that retreat is their best option. Kurogiri, get us out of here, he orders the warper to give them their exit. When there's no response or portal to go through, Tamura spins around. Kurogiri. Kurogiri is gone. Do you think something took him? Twice continues to panic as he fidgets and casts glances in each direction, and maybe it's Batman. Batman's not real. Compress tries to calm Twice down before Tamura loses his patience. But that doesn't help their situation any. Again, the sound of something skittering along the floor. Behind them. Tamura lets out a war cry as he extends an arm, lashing out at the source of noise. But there's nothing there. Damn it. He hisses under his breath. Fuck this. Dabi waves his hand, so that the small flame he's made burns, and what they see terrifies them. They suddenly wish they had just stayed in the dark. Centipedes thicker than their arms and legs combine tread the ceiling and walls. They stretch longer than the room itself, whipping back and around to float in the air. And at the epicenter is a ghoulish visage. Hair bleached white, but body covered in blood, the ghoul levitates using the appendages sprouting from the base of the back. Below the ghoul stands 5 other freakish-looking beings. When a cold contrast from Dabi, dark blue parka covering their full body with the hood drawn up to hide their face, breathes a mist of condensation. Another is a woman with lilac hair and pale blue skin, a jacket with black fur around the collar hanging from her shoulders. Beside her, a man with a red iron mask covering his mouth and white hair like the ghoul matching his cloak. And beside him, a robed figure with their hair tied into a ponytail and an eyeless mask with just a fake mouth etched into it. Lastly, shorter than the rest, someone wrapped in so many bandages that they'd look like a mummy if it weren't for the maroon-hooded cloak draped over them. What the Futomier doesn't get the chance to finish. A centipede wraps around his throat, crushing his windpipe and snapping his neck with one squeeze. Before Twice can let loose a scream, he's impaled by another of the armored appendages. Only then does he cry out. Oh God, I can feel it inside me. I'm real. I'm Ray. He's broken apart from the inside out by the limb and dies. Compress raises his hands to use his quirk, but they're sliced off by the pincers attached to the centipede that comes for him. All he can do is fall on his backside while desperately trying to scramble away from impending doom. I'm sorry. His cries are also cut short. Oh my. The blue-skinned woman below the ghoul covers her mouth with her hand to feign revulsion. But behind that covering, she's smiling. The shorter of the bunch cheers with a small applause, not hiding their delight while watching the horror show. The others' reactions are hard to distinguish considering they all have concealment for their faces. Dobby staggers back, glancing between the fallen members of the League and the group opposing him. Other bodies from the previous bunch to go down also scatter the floor. Knowing he has no chance, no matter the amount of firepower, he falls to his knees and holds his hands up in surrender. The ghoul undoes the zipper across the mouth of his mask. What sounds like Akatani brings some mild relief to the remaining member of the League. Hey Dobby. Long time, no see. Hey man. Dobby's sweat drops. He doesn't know whether it's due to the heat from his flames or his nerves that are on fire though. Wanna join Ajiri? No hard feelings. Akatani's voice doesn't quite match the dark glow coming from his eyes, but Dobby still feels some type of relief upon receiving the offer. I think you'd make a valuable asset. Dobby can't stare into the shattered lens of the ghoul's eyes for too long. He breaks contact, seeing the dead bodies scattering the floor that he's on. The cult surrounds him and the dead members of the League as he basically bows down like a sacrificial offering. To do what? He has to wonder what sort of agenda this group has if it isn't like Stain's ideology. After working with Tomuera, he should have figured the answer would be to set the world ablaze. The blue of the atmosphere is fractured, darkening as it splits into a cracked web. Lately, it's as though the sky has been falling. A non-reflective mirror as fragile as glass is shattered, and everyone below is left to pick up the broken pieces. Or so, that's how Tsukauchi feels as he stares upwards into the not-so-heavenly heavens. The detective opens a black umbrella, hoisting it over his head and blocking the view. Should any more shards rain down from above, he's hoping that the covering will be enough. From here on, he stares ahead. The police cruiser that he borrowed stays stationary, parked behind him. And he moves forward. Even though he feels he's always looking back, going nowhere. Not only had the world lost one of its greatest heroes, if not the greatest hero ever, but Tsukauchi had lost his dearest friend. And the case he'd been too fixated on to set time aside for that friend still remains open. There's a lot of guilt weighing the detective down that he feels pulled back. But as Aizawa would say, there's still work to be done. Speaking of the underground hero, that's exactly who he's come to see. The case involving the Tokyo Ghoul has gotten out of hand, but they started it together, and that means they'll end it together, no matter the grief it gives them. Tsukauchi's grip on the umbrella's handle tightens ever so slightly. He tells himself that it's in case the wind begins to pick up, so that it doesn't fly away. He'd been kicking himself for giving the kid a chance all this time, but he can't imagine how Aizawa must be feeling. So when he knocks on the underground hero's door, he isn't expecting to see what's on the other side. Or rather, who he finds behind the veil. Is that Himiko Toga? His bewilderment leaves him slack-jawed for a few seconds. The League of Villains member sits on the floor of the underground hero's home, eerie across from her. The two girls have a set of coloring books between them, colored crayons scattering the carpet. Both of them pause their doodling to look at the newcomer and wave, but it's the blonde that greets him verbally, hello. And with the nerve to be casual about it no less. Yes. Now that we've established that, get inside before someone else notices. Aizawa grabs Tsukauchi by the collar of his trademark tan overcoat and pulls the detective inside. The underground hero slams the door shut behind them before letting go. Damn it, Aizawa. What's a villain doing in your house? Tsukauchi has trouble reining in his frustration and shock still. After all that has happened, this is the last thing he'd expect from the underground hero. He massages his forehead with his thumb and forefinger, trying to rub out the creases that are bound to become wrinkles. She's a valuable asset when it comes to finding Midoriya. Aizawa crosses his arms over his chest, as though he's confident about what he's saying. However, Tsukauchi is sure he hears a hint of doubt in the statement. The detective folds his own arms to match Aizawa. Oh yeah. How so? His stare is skeptical, not so patiently waiting for the answer to the question. Aizawa looks away, unable to answer at first. All the people that he'd seek out are in one place, but eventually his gaze finds Himiko and Iri. Then, the underground hero turns his eyes back to Tsukauchi, and as his face becomes somber, expression soft despite the rough stubble around his chin, the kid has nobody else. But Tsukauchi remains stone cold, setting his jaw. What makes you think Midoriya would come back to us? He asks the question bitterly. When the underground hero doesn't answer, the detective sighs. Face it, Aizawa. We fucked up. It's his turn to avert his gaze as the feeling of guilt returns. Aizawa stares down at the floor too, still having trouble finding the right response. I refuse to believe he can't still be saved. He eventually settles on a self-indulgent whisper. But after all that has occurred, all the lives that have been lost and the destruction left in the ghoul's wake, the reply from Aizawa only upsets Tsukauchi further. The detective reaches into his overcoat to dig out what he brought, and originally came here to give the hero. Then maybe you should have a look at this. He shoves a book into Aizawa's arms. Aizawa falters, looking down at the novel. It's a hardcover. He bends it open to flip through some of the pages while asking, "What's this?" Let Tsukauchi prompts the hero to keep skimming the pages. They call themselves the Meta Liberation Army, and they're working with Midoriya. Turns out Ajiri Tree is just a branch connecting to them. The connection between the Book of Propaganda and Tokyo Ghoul comes as a shock to Aizawa. How did you come by this? The underground hero glances up from the book to look into Tsukauchi's rectangular eyes. It's a pleading gaze, expressing Aizawa's desire to know more. Tsukauchi breaks eye contact. We've got someone on the inside, but the detective still discloses some of the inside information with a hushed tone. However, who? That only prompts Aizawa to dig deeper for answers. But he can only get so far. Tsukauchi glances around, appearing on the brink of paranoia. Not here. Not with her present, but his sights settle on Himiko, and all is clear to Aizawa then. The underground hero relents. Fine. But this doesn't change the fact that she can be useful. He follows the detective's gaze to the pair of girls coloring together on the floor. We should arrest her, Tsukauchi grumbles just loud enough for Aizawa to hear him. And he doesn't once take his eyes off of the blonde villainess. She can be useful, Aizawa repeats himself with more insistence. Despite sounding so adamant, the hero doesn't get the detective to deter his laser focus on Himiko. She's killed people, Tsukauchi reminds Aizawa of the girl's crimes. There's an unspoken part of that reminder that correlates with Izuku Midoriya, who posed as Akatani Mikumo during his time as the Tokyo Ghoul. Give me a break. And the underground hero finally breaks. He shakes his head and throws his hands up in the air, admitted. Neither of us know what we're doing. We're in over our heads. At this point, there's no wrong choices. Finally, Tsukauchi takes his gaze off of Himiko to assess Aizawa. Though, he doesn't turn his head fully. He side-eyes the underground hero, silently evaluating the emotional outburst that's a tad uncharacteristic. Sensing the investigation and plentitude of cases combining have taken their stressful toll, the detective humors the hero by asking, how exactly do you plan on putting her to good use? Aizawa stops short, clearly not having expected that question. After a moment, he hesitantly tries, You said you have somebody inside the Meta Liberation Army. Though that only prompts Tsukauchi to continue staring with expectations of elaboration. Two are better than one, the underground hero gives a noncommittable shrug as he provides his suggestion. What makes you think we can trust her? Tsukauchi raises a brow as he questions the proposition. He leans heavily to one side, planting his foot down. Who would Midoriya trust more than her? I'm sure they're both in dire need of a long-awaited reunion. Aizawa turns to face the detective fully. His own feet settle into place, his legs standing firm. Tsukauchi casts the underground hero a withering look. Aizawa. I can't even begin to list the number of reasons why that's a bad idea. First and foremost being because their emotions for one another could cause a conflict of interest. He voices his disapproval as delicately as he can though since the hero has clearly gotten so emotionally attached. Yuhu. I'm literally right here, but Himiko herself interjects before Aizawa can begin to respond or Tsukauchi can continue. The fact that she may as well have been listening in on their conversation the entire time has them balking slightly. You're not even whispering, Himiko squints at them teasingly. Why did you think this was a good idea? Tsukauchi turns on Aizawa with a much lighter volume of voice. The hushed tone is slightly hoarse to keep conveying his aggravation though. You can't start now that I pointed it out, Himiko jet. I told you, at this point, any idea is a good idea, but Aizawa ignores the blonde in favor of disputing with Tsukauchi. He too has lowered his voice to a quieter level. What happened to being logical? Tsukauchi snarks again while keeping the same angry whisper. He levels his gaze with Aizawa for added emphasis. You haven't exactly been showing the best judgment lately either, the underground hero responds with his own refute while maintaining eye contact. The staring starts shifting to a set of glares. What's that supposed to mean? Tsukauchi's face forces a frown as he cocks his head incredulously. Wow. You two bicker more than an old married couple, Himiko chimes back in. She hadn't stopped eavesdropping, much more keen to listen in now more than ever. Not helping, Aizawa turns his glare from Tsukauchi to her, in order to quiet her down. The blonde holds up her hands in a sign of mock surrender. When Aizawa turns his attention to Tsukauchi, the detective just shakes his head. Tsukauchi then jabs a harsh finger at the hero's chest. Look at the book. Stay in touch, before using it to switch aim from Aizawa to Himiko, and as for her. The blonde waves. Figure out what you're going to do. I'm not involved. Tsukauchi turns away with a slight flourish of his overcoat. Only after the detective has left and Aizawa is left contemplating with the book in his hands, does Himiko speak up again. I think that went well. Aizawa casts her an unamused glance with a tired tilt of his head. But she's already back to playing with Eri, too occupied to notice. I need a cup of coffee. The underground hero sighs to himself before reopening the lead that Tsukauchi left him with. As for the person on the inside at the Metal Liberation Army, they just so happen to be making their introduction to the ghoul momentarily. Led there by Destro himself, the turncoat steals stencil for the meeting. The Tokyo Ghoul has quite the reputation, after all. Behind closed doors that lead to his quarters within the Metal Liberation Army compound, the ghoul clutches his throbbing skull with pale fingers. Nails blackened by dried blood during his torture dig into the pulsating flesh beneath his bleached hair. Just like the design of his leather mask, his teeth are gritted together. Sweat drips down his face, the same as a few tear droplets coming out of his bloodshot eyes. My fingers in my mouth, his hands fly from clutching his head to in front of his face, so that he can see the scarring of where his fingers have been severed, centipedes crawling in my ears. The panic boy smacks at his frontal lobe, trying to shake something out. In my head. He shouts while pivoting in a mismatched fashion to how his mind is spiraling out of control. A memory. A distant memory. Mother, he calls out to the image in his mind of a green-haired woman covered in blood. Realizing that she's dead and that he's the reason for her death, he comes to a jarring halt. I'm so fucked up. He whines through ragged breaths before sensing the presence of others than himself. The ghoul snarls, turning to glare at whoever dares enter his den without knocking first. He finds Riki Yatsubashi in the doorway, standing next to another familiar face. Red feathered wings and ash blonde hair that matches the yellow eyes are covering his eyes. The pro-hero known as Hawks has joined their ranks, the same as Slight and Go betrayed the heroes. He can't say he's too pleased to be working with either of them if they're such frauds to heroism, but he also doesn't have much of a choice. He forces his sneer to morph into a more welcoming expression. The expression Hawks had throughout witnessing the whole mental breakdown stays on his face. Hawks has no idea how true that statement is. The tap of shoes treading tile echoes through the hall. A hall that's barely decorated, paintings only periodically giving some semblance of style or taste. The paintings aren't very artsy. There's no colored carpeting. No tasteful ceiling. Like above, the walls hold a dull pale coating of white paint. The recently recruited hero Hawks walks side by side with the Tokyo Ghoul, venturing through the Metal Liberation Army compound, trying not to judge whoever coordinated design plans. With not much of a scenic sight to look at, Hawks breaks the equally boring silence with a glance over at the moody teen accompanying his trip, so. No glance or reply back from the kid. The hero tries not to take it too personally. I didn't expect you to be so young. He instead tries creating the conversation himself. Still nothing. They just continue walking. A few more seconds of the silent treatment and no hint of acknowledgement almost makes the hero lose hope in having a discussion. But eventually, the boy glances over and replies, "Don't you hold the record for the world's youngest hero?" Hawks lights up, ecstatic not just from receiving a response, but also because of the mild trivia knowledge. A hero fanatic, huh? A grin finds itself on the hero's stubbled face, as he tries teasing the kid a little, or just a fan of me in particular. The boy shrugs, either unfazed by the playfulness or really good at hiding his embarrassment. He looks forward instead of at the hero, attention divided between the hall and the conversation. Pick your poison. His tone sounds as dull as the place looks, but Hawks still notes the mild humor hidden within. The hero chuckles, finding it funny how much attitude the kid has. With a shake of his head, Hawks spares another glance. The teen appears to be going through his gothic phase, trying out for Edgelord of the Year. Black leather adorns the boy's body, and his mask look, "You've got quite the personality," is all he manages to say about it all. The boy returns the glance, surprising Hawks. Especially since the eye he peers into doesn't look like any other. There's a deep dark dive of darkness, only accompanied by a single small orb of red. Shocking the hero even further, he doesn't quite understand what the boy means when he asks, "Which one?" Hawks falters as he tries to shake off the strange feeling that he gets. He forces himself to break eye contact, trying to set his sights on what's ahead instead. Turns out that was a good idea. There's a set of oak doors that they're quickly approaching. Never mind, the Tokyo Ghoul presses past the hero to push them open. "We're here," and announces what's on the other side as the intended destination of their travels within the facility. Hawks catches sight of a round table, chairs circling around it with some of those seats occupied. 6 people in total occupy the space. One of the group, short like the kid with the maroon cloak and floral scarf, springs up and runs towards him. Hawks braces for impact, tightening his muscles preemptively. But the person blurs past him and tackles the boy he came with instead. Or, well, tries to anyway. The kid barely budges, getting wrapped up in a hug as he stands there stoically. Ghoulie. A girlish squeal of delight comes from the cloak bundle of bandages. Ghoulie doesn't return her cheerfulness though, trying to pry the short girl off of him. I told you not to invade my space, he chastises her with a tired tone that says this has happened enough to not come as a surprise to him. Hawks clears his throat, reminding the two that he's standing right next to them. Gaining their attention, he tries teasing Ghoulie again with a sly smirk. "This your girlfriend?" he asks. "No," comes the immediate response from the boy. Though the girl just as quickly says, yes, overlapping and contradicting him. The two stare at one another, as though they're silently arguing over the answer, both as shocked by the other over their responses. After a brief moment, the boy sighs and introduces her. "This is Ito," the girl waves. "Ito, I'm sure you know Hawks," he gestures between the two of them to finish the formalities. And Hawks returns the bubbly attitude with a friendly greeting of his own. He smiles and waves, returning the favor. If the girl is indeed the boy's girlfriend, then he guesses it's true what they say, opposites do attract. "Would it hurt if I plucked out your feathers?" Ito tilts her head as though the spontaneous question is one from childlike innocence. Hawks raises a brow, starting to reevaluate his earlier thought, understanding why and how two villains would be attracted to one another in other ways. "A little bit," he answers her honestly while forcing a smile to stay on his face. He figures it's probably best to be polite considering he's outnumbered, and there's no telling what they can do. The bandages around Ito's mouth furrow a bit, indicating that she's smiling back at him. Good to know, her cheery tone suddenly sounds a lot more malicious than it previously did. Hawks feels a nervous bead of sweat rolling down his forehead. Quickly, he wipes it away by running his hand up and over through his hair, subtly hiding the potential sign of weakness. Charming, he has to maintain the charade that he's been putting on. The sound of heels clicking against tile announces the arrival of another person coming to introduce herself. A blue-skinned woman tosses her lilac hair over her shoulder, but not as dashing as you. Hawks the hero knows that out of everyone here, she certainly had nothing to do with the building's poor decoration, considering her sense of style is rather formal. The shoulderless black dress contrasts a salmon-toned jacket in a fashionable way. "I would love to interview you sometime. And find out what makes you tick," though the way she talks like the other femme fatale reminds him quickly of how she's a villainess. This is Shidis. She's overzealously curious, so she may come across as forward at times. The Tokyo Ghoul continues serving as a mediator, and unenthusiastically introduces the woman to the hero. He's lost his flourish despite never having had any to begin with, throwing up his hand and letting it drop with a haphazard gesture. "Guilty?" Shidis shrugs with some over-exaggeration. Her lips raise into a smile that comes across as anything but kindly. Charmed, Hawks takes her hand and kisses the backside of it to show some chivalry anyways. He also figures he may as well indulge a little in his performance for the villains. Speaking of the others, the Tokyo Ghoul gestures broadly at the ones who didn't bother to stand up and introduce themselves. And the rest are Jigen, Tatara, Noro, and Dabi. The last one at least acknowledges the hero with a small nod. They're less rowdy than the females. The Ghoul provides an excuse on their behalf for the lack of a warm welcome. Considering the glares that Hawks is receiving from the majority of them though, and his previous experiences with the others, he can't say he doesn't mind. So this is Ajiri. He takes in the group with a sweep of the room. All of them seem dangerously deadly. We're one big happy family tree. Ito returns to her seat with a light plop. She props her feet up on the table, leaning back and lounging with her arms tucked behind her hooded head. Clearly, Dabi scoffs and rolls his eyes after making a sarcastic comment. It doesn't seem that he agrees with Ito's sentiment. She sits up, taking her legs off the table and moving her arms to cross over her chest, pouting. Ridestro saw it fit to put you with us, considering this subdivision was created fairly recently. The Tokyo Ghoul snaps Hawk's attention back to him as he passes by and elaborates more on the group in technical terms. The hero watches the boy take a seat at the head of the table, dead center and across from him. "So what you're saying is that this is where they stick the newbies?" Hawks grabs his own chair since everyone else is getting comfortable. He may as well settle in for the long haul, since this is beginning to look like it'll take a while. The Ghoul shrugs. "Considering I'm the founder and a newbie myself, that sounds appropriately correct," and seems pleased when his revelation that he's Ajiri's leader surprises Hawks. "You?" The hero is once again struck by how somebody so young could embed themselves within the underworld of villains so deeply. He's especially shocked by how the boy managed to gain such a high position of power. "Tell me more." He leans forward a little to properly hear all the details. "And they call me curious." Shidis laughs at her own joke from across the table. Hawks has half a mind to force a chuckle, but is relieved that he doesn't have to when nobody else does. Oh, can I be the one to tell him? Can I?" Ito jumps up with her hand raised over her head. With her arm outstretched as high as it can go, she wiggles in place full of eagerness to speak. Suddenly, one of the silent members decides it's time to speak up. He's as compassed and as stoic as his leader, with just as much of a commanding gait to how he stands up so effortlessly proud. We don't know if he can be trusted completely just yet. Tatar speaks through his red mouthpiece, but his voice doesn't come out muffled at all. The words weigh heavily on Hawks. He's got a point. Dobby casts Hawks a suspicious sidelong stare while considering Tatar's input. But their leader holds up a hand to silence them, as well as preventing anybody else from chiming in. Tatar sits back down, as well as Ito. Hawks is surprised by how the kid can command such respect from the bunch. You should already know about our cause thanks to our publisher, and he finds himself giving the boy his full undivided attention. That is, until the ghoul nods towards Ito. I'm the author. Ito expresses her pride with a display of what looks like jazz hands. The hero isn't all that stunned to see a book placed on the table in front of him. He's seen it before. He knows about the secret messages encoded inside. Though he is amazed by how, yet again, someone so young can make such an impact. I gave Ghoulie a signed copy. Ito leans her head on a propped hand to stare fondly in the ghoul's direction. You like to read? Hawks turns his gaze towards the ghoul too with a hint of amusement. He isn't done trying to successfully tease the boy just yet. Plus, the joking around helps ease the tension and quell his anxiety about being undercover. Don't you? The ghoul stares back with still no reaction to the playfulness. Not so much. Hawks shrugs before opening up the book in front of him. He doesn't actually read anything on the pages as he flips through. I did get the gist of the agenda though. You follow the philosophy that there should be a free usage of quirks as a basic human right. Pretty noble stuff. Some wouldn't think so. Jeeton also finally breaks his silence to chime in. White eyes glow from within the shadows casted by the HUD concealing his face. Hawks doesn't bother staring into the orbs for too long. Well, you do emphasize liberation over regulation. The hero tries defending those who oppose the Meta Liberation Army's beliefs. Part of him is hoping he may be able to appeal to the group. Or, at least, to their leader. He is just a kid, after all. We can't change what quirks we were born with. Designating people as villains over something they can't control is pitiful. Not to mention how heroes are kept in action due to prohibiting quirk usage. You think heroes would be all that needed if civilians were allowed to use their quirks in order to defend themselves? But the ghoul's response on behalf of Jeeton and the rest of Ajiri doesn't leave much room for argument if his tone is anything to go by. Hawks catches Dobby's gaze. The villain covered in burns looks away, piquing the hero's interest a little. But he lets it slide. He turns his attention back to the ghoul and nods, all valid points. But what are you going to do about it? Something is better than sitting around and doing nothing. The ghoul flicks his hand as though he's brushing the question away. He's disinterested in answering. Or maybe, he's hiding his true intentions. But Hawks won't let it go that easily. So young and you've already got it all figured out. He hopes that goading the kid will get him to slip up. The hero prays that his risky move gets answers instead of getting him killed. You sound as though you don't sympathize nor empathize with our cause, but Jeeton is the one who takes the bait. The villain's tone is ice cold, accusation of frosty bitter bite. I didn't say that. Hawks holds up his hands in a placating gesture. He waits for the attitude to de-escalate before continuing. I'm just shocked by your leader is all seeing that nerves are high-strung amongst the group now, but the ghoul still hasn't fallen for the emotional trap. Hawks takes the full plunge into his self-dug grave, and I'm still wondering what the plan is. Nobody says anything aloud, only speaking to each other through quick glances. But eventually, Tatar and the Tokyo Ghoul come to some sort of unspoken agreement. We're going to declare war. The Ajiri leader finally reveals their agenda. War? In the streets. Though the implications of high-stake conflict only provokes more questions to spawn in the hero's mind. First and foremost, he's concerned about where the conflict will be taking place. Tatar narrows his eyes, squinting at the hero with a look of irritation. The battleground is yet to be chosen. His answer about the location sounds like a bold-faced lie. But Hawks knows better than to dispute it with how much tension he's already caused there to be in the room. That's the plan. Charge into battle and hope we win. He instead opts for a different approach to gaining information. Any amount of intel is worth knowing, like what sort of strategy Ajiri has in mind, or what kind of plan of attack they may use. There's a bit more to it than that. But that's all you need to know, but Jeeton is still giving him the cold shoulder. The villain makes it crystal clear that Hawks still has to earn their trust before knowing more. Hawks relents, much to his disappointment. Right. I'm the new guy. Almost forgot. He tries not to sulk too much as he accepts that he won't be learning anything else that's useful. No offense. Ito contrasts his mood with a cheery interjection from across the table. And he can't help but accept the gesture to get back in everyone's good graces. None taken, he forces a smile to show them all that he harbors no hard feelings. The Tokyo Ghoul abruptly gets up, chair legs screeching against the floor's tile. If we're done here. He hastily moves to leave, but Dobby stands up to block his path. The ghoul looks annoyed by the obstruction, but Dobby doesn't back down. You excusing yourself? Dobby looks concerned for the boy's well-being, but keeps his distance. Hawks notes the dynamic, finding their relationship interesting. Then again, everyone appears startled by their leader's sudden decision to leave. Even Nora with his silence, possibly mute Hawks theorizes, and his full face covering. I have another headache. The ghoul clutches the side of his head. He digs his dark fingernails into his contrasting bright hair. He appears anxious now, desperate to leave the room. Wordlessly, Dobby accepts the reasoning and steps aside. But before the ghoul can make it out of the room without any other interruptions, Ito chases after him. She tries grasping onto his arm, but he shakes her off. Think I can make it better for you? She tries calling after him with her best attempt at what sounds like a seductive tone. But he doesn't stop his stride towards the exit, nor does he bother looking back. You just make it worse, the ghoul growls under his breath as his walk becomes a stagger. Unbeknownst to his team, he feels like there's more crawling around in his head than his thoughts. Let him rest. Tatara prevents Ito from following by waving her back over to the table. There's still things we can discuss without him, and Hawk's own momentary concern is forgotten for the time being. His priority as an undercover hero to gather intel, and having the potential to discover more about the villain group's operation, has him returning his attention to the villains at the table. Besides, there's not much Hooks or any of Jerry can do for the ghoul as he staggers into the restroom. He's away from prying eyes and ears, but that doesn't relieve his suffering. The throbbing in the boy's skull has him banging it against the door. Just in case anybody hears the commotion, he turns the latch and locks it. There's so much sweat coming from him that his dampened hair is starting to cling to his skin. The ghoul stumbles, catching himself on the sink. He leans on the bathroom appliance, using it as a crutch. It's hard to breathe. He rips the leather mask off of his face and discards it for the time being. Strong intakes of air has him panting heavily. His chest heaves in and out. He closes his eyes and focuses on the oxygen he swallows. And only after he's got his breathing under control, does he raise his head to have a look at himself in the mirror. His reflection doesn't match his physical appearance. Not entirely. A white-eyed boy stares with his mouth agape, green hair matted down the same as the ghoul's snow-white locks. The eyes of the reflection are also an emerald color. Not like the ghoul's dark chasms with contrasting crimson at their center. When he tilts his head one way, his mirror self turns at the other. Suddenly, a burning sensation floods the left field of his vision. He cries out as the searing strike stabs through his eye, reflexively grabbing at his face and rubbing around the edges. The ghoul catches a glimpse of himself in the mirror again with his remaining good eye. He sees what has happened. One eye is his and the other no longer has the Kakugan state active. Panicking, the ghoul scrambles for his mask and pulls it back on. The eye patch plugs the leak. He looks at himself in the mirror again, willing his reflection to show himself. It does. And faintly, he forgets his own name. He's not the boy he saw. That was Izuku Midoriya. The scrambling of his mind has ceased for him to not care anymore. The ghoul unlocks the door and exits the restroom. He finds Redestro waiting for him outside. Are you alright? The head of the Meta Liberation Army raises a brow. I'm fine, the ghoul hisses with frustration. After snapping, he reins in his anger and tries to ask coolly, what is it? I was just wondering if you informed them about your plan to infiltrate Tartarus yet, and Redestro doesn't dwell on his well-being much to the ghoul's relief. Redestro instead focuses on the objective the ghoul had come to the villain organization's leader about in the first place. No, he shakes his head in denial. I'm saving that for the day of, because not even Redestro knows about the true purpose of infiltrating the prison. The Meta Liberation Army leader believes it's to break out members of his cause to have more numbers in the upcoming war. But in reality, he wants to reach all for one. As always disquietingly aware of the security system Nezu has in place at UA, which should bring solace in light of recent events, now hangs heavily over his head like a guillotine. Since despite being a teacher at the educational institution, he has no validation for entering Chiyu's office currently. The nurse's medical supplies glint under the fluorescent light of the room when he flicks the switch to the bulbs. The underground hero has no doubt Nezu will review the camera footage if he's not currently watching them live, the principal always acutely conscious of things. He's bound to be caught and questioned if not immediately. And yet, he commits to why he's risking entering the medbay. A large metal cabinet that appears to be for filing records at first glance resides at the back of the room. Aizawa knows better, having contributed to the container's contents himself. Nezu wondering why the teacher has entered the nurse's station unscheduled is one thing, but the principal will be beyond wonderment when he sees what Aizawa takes undocumented. Using Chiyu's spare key that she keeps hidden under the plant she leaves on the windowsill, the underground hero unlocks the cupboard. Vials glisten when exposed to the room's light, plastic bags as equally radiant. The bright red liquid within reacts to the illumination akin to when the sun hits water, almost aglow. Blood bags and DNA samples stowed away in case of an emergency. Should somebody require a transfusion or anything along those lines, the skull is more than prepared. They're labeled. The names of donors, blood types, student and teacher IDs, all the fixings are written out for convenience and safety. The practicality of Chiyu's organization is part of why Aizawa and the healing heroine had gotten along so well over the years. It's also a saving grace of time and trouble for him to select whose blood he came for in particular. Aizawa slides a tube from its rack, handling it carefully so that it doesn't break. Once the vial is pocketed in one of the compartments around the waist of his hero uniform, Aizawa closes the cabinet and leaves. Meanwhile, blood is being spilt. Mirio Tagata wipes the copper taste off his lips with a swipe of his thumb. He'd been knocked on the training mat so many times now that his usual optimistic smile has been replaced by a frustrated frown. The elder hero who had taught Tagata's predecessor darts from wall to ceiling before landing in a poised crouch on the floor. Gran Torino, no taller than the height of Tagata's leg, stands up. The old man glares through the domino mask covering his face, dissatisfied with his student's performance. Again, Gran Torino snaps at Tagata angrily. Relentlessly, the two have been training non-stop like this. The elder hero's yellow cape flaps through the air, trailing behind him as he propels himself at extreme speeds. Tagata has time to barely react, Gran Torino moving within the blink of an eye. Gran Torino soars like a jet on takeoff, impact like a missile launched from one. Tagata blocks with his elbows, the kicks pounding his bones. All Might's successor had been ordered to fight without the usage of his quirk, to make the fight more strenuous. No permeation. No one for all. Using only what he built in the gym, Tagata's muscles tense to shield his innards from Gran Torino's barrage. After All Might's full, Tagata has no choice but to push himself beyond his limits. No longer can he wait to replace the symbol of peace. There's no time to prepare anymore. He has to be strong enough to stand as tall and firm as All Might now more than ever. It's his duty after having one for all passed on to him. Under the tutelage of Gran Torino, Tagata plans to save over 1 million lives. And to stop just as many villains. Gran Torino rockets from one end of the room to the other. The old man is more than spry for his age, curving through the air like a bullet. Tagata tries to track the movement as best as he can, straining his eyes. He saw the way that the Tokyo Ghoul moved on television. The centipede-like limbs alone match Gran Torino's speed. If Tagata wants to be Lemillion and bring the villain to justice, then he needs to become just as fast. The muscular blonde yells as he gives it his all, reaching out to grab his opponent midair. Tagata had hoped to snatch Gran Torino in the middle of momentum. Instead, he grabs a fistful of nothing. Yet again, a yellow boot smashes into the blonde's jaw. And Tagata is knocked onto the training mat. Luckily, only sweat splatters the soft cushioning this time. Though red specks from previous landings have made their mark. Tagata grunts in aggravation, slamming his fist down on the padding. He already knows what his trainer is going to say before he hears it. Again. Tagata is back on his feet before the order even reaches his ears. He uses his calves to push off, going on the offensive this time. A thick layer of glass, polymethyl methacrylate, separates spectators from the intensive training. The clear barrier is the same type of material used in aquariums or zoos. So when Tagata gets slammed into it, the glass doesn't shatter or even crack. Tamaki and Ejire share a collective wince upon witnessing the impact up close. The two close friends of Tagata had been watching from the sidelines for quite some time now. They're beginning to become concerned. Behind them, a third person arrives to join in. Lightfoot folds echo and alert Tamaki and Ejire. All Might's sidekick, Sir Night-Eye, steps in between the two to get a close look. He's still going. The hero keeps his gaze fixed on Tagata's training, despite addressing the two people at either side of him. He hasn't stopped once. Tamaki grimaces in sympathy of his friend's pain. Nejire walks around Sir Night-Eye to place a hand on his shoulder in consolation. Witnessing the strain Tagata is going through for himself, Night-Eye hums in contemplation. After a moment of consideration, the hero raps on the glass to get everyone's attention. Gran Torino stops beating the hell out of his student long enough for Night-Eye to then enter the room and speak. That's enough, his declaration earns scowls from both Tagata and Torino. I can keep going. Tagata tries arguing. Though Night-Eye can't see the way the boy's body shudders as it tries desperately to remain standing. He hasn't achieved his goal for today just yet. Gran Torino folds his arms across his chest with a shake of his head. He still hasn't caught me. Sorihiko. I said enough. Night-Eye glowers at the senior through the lens of his glasses. Gran Torino is about to glare back, but he finally notices Tagata's current worn-down state. The old man huffs before walking off. Night-Eye returns his attention to Tagata, hit the showers and get dressed. The Hero Committee is about to announce Endeavor as the new #1. The change to the Billboard chart is being given a huge presentation. Within a stadium, heroes will be taking to a stage for the first time at one of these events to boost morale. Reporters join a crowd of cheering fans as music hypes up the reveal. Whoever isn't attending the event in person is watching it through a live feed. The world waits to see what a hero listing without All Might will look like. Ranking at number 10, Ryukyu takes the stage. She waves nervously as the crowd goes wild, applauding and whistling in support. She's followed by number 9, a hero clad in samurai armor, Yoroi. And then number 8, a washing machine. The crowd's cheers diminish a little at that one. Kamui Woods and Crust rejuvenates the awe factor immediately after though. Whoops and hollers only get louder when Mirko and Deadshot join the stage. Backstage, preparing for his turn when his announcement as number 2 comes, Hawks paces impatiently. He's not fretting over the wait until his shining moment of stardom though. He's stressing over the absence of the heroes he's supposed to meet before going on stage. Sir Night-Eye had arranged with him beforehand a brief rendezvous, saying the underground hero Racerhead and a detective would also be there. Thankfully, Night-Eye remains true to his word. The hero arrives. Along with a few extras he hadn't mentioned would be part of the meetup. Cutting it a little close, aren't you? Hawks tries funneling his nerves through a comedic filter to calm himself down. You're the one who wanted to do this here and now instead of at Night-Eye's agency. The detective doesn't appear to be in the best of moods to joke around though. Hawks can see from the lack of shaving and eye bags that the officer must be working around the clock just as him. Actually, that was at my discretion. We can't risk spies or prying eyes and ears in any place too public. Night-Eye comes to his fellow hero's rescue by taking the heat of the detective. But he's not just a scapegoat. He truly did arrange for the intel delivery to be here of all places. And yet, you chose the most public places of them all. Eraserhead holds a dry tone, but his slightly raised eyebrows are inquisitive. Hawks figures he'll return the favor and cover for Night-Eye this time. Exactly. It's too combust and full of heroes with a high security detail to boot for the villains to watch or listen in. This is my one opportunity to share with you the intel that I've learned. He knows full well the strategy behind picking such a peculiar time and location. So spill it, one of the unmentioned attendees chimes in. A spiky-haired blonde in a UA uniform standing beside Eraserhead. A prospective hero attending the school most likely. Who's the kid? But Hawks questions the boy's presence anyways. He's likely a first year. Second year at best. Not like the much bulkier blonde beside Night-Eye. He has a connection to a person of interest. Don't pay him any mind, but Eraserhead brushes off the matter as no big deal. As a matter of fact, he looks keen to change the subject as soon as possible. Okay. Hawks refrains from prying though. He figures the underground hero could just be concerned that they'll run out of time before intel can be shared. Algeria is a subset of the Meta Liberation Army just like we thought. And they're planning something big. Hawks starts talking out of his own concerns over being pressed for time. How big? The detective plucks a notepad from his coat pocket to write stuff down. Hawks waits for the officer to flip to a blank page before replying. The war, the hero tries gauging everyone's reaction as he conveys the most dire of revelations. As expected, they range from surprise to worry. When? Where? But the detective recovers quick enough to ask more questions for his notes. Already, he's jotting something down. I don't have high enough clearance to know that yet. Hawks shakes his head with a disappointed sigh. But listen to what I do know. The one leading Algeria is the Tokyo Ghoul. He moves on to the next big piece of information instead. He's leading them. Which seems even more shocking to Eraserhead than the prospect of a war. Hawks stares sidelongingly at the underground hero, sensing a deeper connection to that part of the investigation. Perhaps the mystery of the UA student has been solved as well. What do you know about him? Especially since the blonde boy jumps at the mention of the Tokyo Ghoul like a dog on a bone. Bakugo. Eraserhead catches the boy by the crook of his arm to stop him. There's an exchange of glares between them, something unspoken. But before anyone can say anything more, the speaker system announces that their meeting is over. And now ... introducing number 2. Hawks. The stadium roars behind the curtains to the stage as Hawks is called out. The hero winces, not wanting to leave. But he doesn't have a choice. Sorry. That's my cue. Hawks hopes what he's left them with will be enough before walking into a sea of adoring fans. This isn't over. Night-Eye is the first to speak once Hawks is gone. He adjusts his glasses before casting a look towards Tsukauchi. See what you can uncover about this war. I'm assuming they'll need to arm themselves if they're not gathering numbers. You can leave that to me, but Eraserhead steps forth to turn the attention towards him instead. As an underground hero, he knows full well how to operate the underworld to gather information. I'll hit the usual spots. Any potential leads are usually funneled through particular places that became common habitat for criminal scum, and it's better not to scare them away with the cops snooping around. I'll try finding the ghoul then. Tsukauchi narrows his eyes at the underground hero. Neither of them are bound to have any luck considering they had difficulty at the start of the investigation, but he had expected Aizawa to jump at the opportunity to find his problem child. Night-Eye places a hand on the strong shoulder of the burly blonde he brought with him, steering the boy away. I will continue preparing Mario and the others at my agency for the inevitable battle then. He sounds as stressed as everyone there, but keeps a stoic gait as he escorts the future hero. There's a lot on his shoulders too, with nobody placing a consoling hand on either one. Aizawa walks away with his own aspiring hero. Or, so the boy had seemed to be. Once the two find themselves a private corner, Bakugo's face begins to partially melt away. Grey goop uncovers a feminine voice beneath. Himiko Toga's quirk had camouflaged her using the blood that the underground hero took from UA's medical supply. Now what? She asks. The underground hero raises a brow as though the question makes no sense. Didn't you hear me? We're going to investigate some arms dealings. He's finally found a use for the girl with a criminal background. The headset fits snug around his ears, not like the underground hero's goggle straps that chase the skin. As much as he hates sitting on the sidelines, he has to admit that the alternative is better in this case. Eraserhead listens through the wire that Himiko Toga is wearing beneath her clothes as she saunters into a black market for weapons. She goes unsuspected of anything and he doesn't have to lift a finger. The known criminal blends into her environment, stopping by a few knife stands to seem natural. But she and the underground hero both know that the Metal Liberation Army will be using gear much deadlier than blades. He listens closely as she finally tries the first of many posts-selling firearms. The blonde villainess approaches a cephalopodic man. The fellow criminal's head resembles the mantle of an octopus, tentacles with suction cups hanging down from his face. A red hood that matches the villain's pappily covered skin covers his eyes. Himiko tries to make their gazes meet despite the covering. A harpoon gun. Something pointy like a knife that can be shot. Tempting. She pretends to be interested in one of the weapons being sold to further rein in the seller's attention. 6,000, the vendor does reply, but still doesn't bother to lift his gaze. The price is also double the cost of what a legal sale would cost. Not cheap. Himiko's expression must convey her thoughts because the villain adds, not negotiable. Take it or leave it. Himiko holds up her index finger, wagging it back and forth while tutting. I didn't say I was gonna buy it. I said it was tempting to buy. She flashes her pointed canines with a wide grin. But the arms dealer doesn't smile back. Then don't waste my time. He waves a hand to shoo her away like some pesky brat he doesn't want distracting him. Don't be like that. Himiko tries not to sound like she's whining too much to avoid that brat label, but still doesn't give up. She casually browses the broader selection of weapons. I'm sure there's something here you can convince me to bring home. Her eyes roam the crates containing explosives. Most people already know what they're looking for, but the gun merchant isn't convinced by her act just yet. Beneath the hood that shields his eyes, he watches Himiko with a critical gaze. Himiko pretends she doesn't notice the judgmental stare. What about the ones who don't? She keeps hoping that her nonchalant attitude will sway him. They don't exist, but the salesman doesn't fold easily. Suddenly, Himiko's own earpiece buzzes to life. Hers is much smaller, meant to go unnoticed. Made more for espionage than comfort. Steer him on topic, Eraserhead tries helping her direct her conversation in the right direction. Himiko covers her mouth with the crook of her arm, pretending to sneeze. I'm getting there. She uses that brief moment to whisper her response to the underground hero. When she lowers her arm and redirects her attention to the villain, she asks, do you sell in stock to anyone? That gets the arms dealer to look up at her. Only when there's a large group, he glances around as though searching for someone standing behind her. When confirming that she's by herself, he asks, you representing someone, Girly? Now's your chance. Eraserhead's voice buzzes in her ear again. Unless one of my associates already came by. Himiko shrugs to act as though it's not such a big deal. Now that she's got his attention, she switches tactics to seem disinterested. I'm with the Metal Liberation Army, and hopes her lie works. Can't say they have. The weapon seller strokes one of his tentacles like it's part of a beard. Hook, line, and sinker. The anthropomorphic octopus has been caught. Too bad not dealing with the Metal Liberation Army means he's useless to them. Still, the arms dealer tries to be polite now in order to win her over. Perhaps I should have introduced myself sooner. I'm Innsmouth. How can I be of service to you? On second thought, I'm gonna try looking around some more. Himiko backs away into the crowd of other criminals mingling the market. Innsmouth doesn't even get the chance to stop her before she slips into the sea of villains. Smooth, Eraserhead didn't have to see her vanishing act to know she abruptly ended the conversation with Innsmouth. His tone is a balance between being impressed and disapproval of her actions. It was a dead end. I wasn't gonna stand around wasting time, Himiko mutters under her breath so nobody but he can hear her. She weaves in and out between other people roaming the area. You can't go checking every stand either. Not only is there too many, but that'd be bound to raise suspicion. The underground chastising her earns an eye roll from the blonde. It's not like you can see her do it. I'm not hearing any better ideas, Himiko grumbles. Under ordinary circumstances, if he were in front of her, he probably wouldn't be able to hear the comment, but the comlink is close enough to her mouth to pick up her voice. Eraserhead hums as he considers the truth behind her remark. It takes him but a moment to make a suggestion. We could take turns. Going in shifts might work. He considers swapping between the two of them to avoid getting caught. But Himiko has paused in the middle of the market with something else on her mind. Hey, that's the 10th time I saw a gun stand with one of those cases. She notices that there's a common container with each vendor, which also catches Eraserhead's interest. Must be a third-party seller. I doubt everyone there stole from the same place. He hopes it's a lead and asks, does the box say anything? Himiko tries to get closer to read the kanji without squinting. Detmerit. The logo and text belongs to a company. A familiar one. The same enterprise selling books that promote the Metal Liberation Army's cause. They never needed illegal weapons. They had them in stock already. Eraserhead realizes the business must have warehouses full of firearms. They're arming their troops already. He's already hurrying to meet Himiko at their rendezvous point. For what? The blonde begins moving at a brisker pace to get there as well. She glances at each vendor as she passes them. The stands are crowded. She already knows the answer. It's to build an army. And at the forefront of that army, Ajiri gathers for another meeting. Hawk strolls into the room to find everyone else waiting for him. All eyes land on him when he comes through the door. He can even feel Noro's stare through the villain's creepy mask. Am I interrupting something? Hawks tries to break the tension with a forced smile. Not at all. He's only partially relieved when Curious is the only one to return the gesture. How goes moonlighting as a hero? Her own day job interviewing people gets the better of her. Business as usual. Hawks thinks back to his quick meeting with Night Eye and the others, before shrugging off the question and trying to throw it back at them. What about you all? Any off hours? I play online Go sometimes. Ito is the only one to indulge the hero. She earns a few looks, some of them glares. What? She shrinks in on herself until all that's left is embarrassment. Never a break here, Cheaton responds coldly to the question. And the same should go for you if you're devoted to our cause. He's still clearly not warmed up to the turncoat hero just yet. Hey, I've got a public opinion to maintain. Cut me some slack. Hawks holds his hands up in a placating manner, while trying to defend himself for being tardy. He can only hope that they aren't suspicious of him, his paranoia getting the better of him. Typical hero for you. Dobby mumbles under his breath as he crosses his arms. He still advocates for Stain's cause more than the Meta Liberation armies. But the Tokyo Ghoul puts a stop to the discussion, standing up. Hawks is right. His reputation is important to us. It'd be foolhardy to throw it all away. The hero is relieved that their leader speaks in his defense. I agree. As much as I hate to admit it, Hawks is even more surprised when Tatara also backs him up. Though the Ajiri subordinate could just be going along with what the Ghoul is saying. Forget it. We shouldn't waste time on this crap, Cheaton growls as he waves a hand to push the matter aside. He's agitated more than usual, already fed up with the group's conversation. Jack Frost here has a point, and Dobby doesn't help to quell that anger. The nickname earns a glare from Cheaton. Can you tell us why you called this meeting already? But Dobby doesn't seem to notice or care. Sorry that it's on such short notice. The Ghoul nods in understanding of everybody's frustration though. Hawks shudders when the Ghoul's gaze meets his. But I'm left no choice other than to take such precautions, especially when he hears the next sentence out of the Ajiri leader's mouth. And here I thought we were beginning to bond. Hawks sighs as he realizes it's going to be a lot harder than he initially imagined to gather information for a counterattack. Boo. We can always do trustful exercises. Ito hops up with a raised hand as she tries to make a suggestion. Though Dobby is quick to oppose the idea, I am not trusting any of you whack jobs to catch me. Takes one to know one. Cheaton glances at the fire user with disdain in his eyes. Dobby returns the glare and holds it a while longer. That's enough, you two. Tatara stands up to maintain order. He matches the Ghoul's aura, even his white hair, a similarity of its own to the Ajiri leader. Once the group is quieted down, their boss clears his throat and begins again. As I was saying, they flinch when they hear his own agitation leaking through. In preparation for the upcoming war, we have ourselves a side mission, but Hawks is put even more on edge. The sudden announcement of a detour worries the hero, especially when what looks like a warp gate opens up. If you follow me. The Ghoul confirms the portal is indeed a means of transportation by stepping into it. I love surprises. How fun. Ito charges after him without a hint of hesitation, though the others are just as apprehensive as the hero. Wishing to win them over, Hawks follows after Ito, hoping that proves something to the group of villains. I hate surprises. Dobby grumbles and complains. Though his protest falls on deaf ears, the others already following Hawks' lead. Dobby disappointedly goes with them. Greetings everyone. He's shocked to see a familiar face on the other side. A wisp of purple smoke, the culprit for the warp gate. A fellow former member of the League of Villains that Dobby had believed to be dead. But what's far more disturbing is the scenery of where they've all been relocated. Shifting of tides so dark that they lost their blue tint rise over a drop-off, the black waters beckoning whoever dives in to drown. Spears of rain stab the earth, pricking the group like cruel needles. Mud and muck clings to their feet as they sink into the ground, a wet burial in process while they're still alive. Trees have lost all their green, withered down to brittle bark and pointed branches. All of Ajiri turn towards their leader for answers. Most people would expect someone to break out of this place. Well, Ajiri will be breaking in. The Tokyo Ghoul only prompts them to continue looking around. The environment is merely but a threshold to an even worse place. Walls that may as well be made of brimstone reach over the suffocating slashes of the sea's liquid talons. Barbed wire runs over the top of the barrier, the wall's own set of claws. Oh, it's you again. Ito seems to be the only one unbothered by the view. She instead fixates on the warper. What the hell is Kurogiri doing here? For which Dobby is grateful since he's able to momentarily forget about where he's been dropped off. Only momentarily though. His eyes are drawn back to the colossal castle buried in the depths of the ocean. What even is this place? I'm sure you're used to the flames. The Tokyo Ghoul chuckles, as though he just made a joke. He trudges through the mud and towards the cliff that stretches out towards the structure ahead. The deepest region of hell is where we're headed, and he announces their destination. Only Hawks is able to recognize it, his dread at their sudden drop-off enhanced tenfold. Tartarus. He exhales as though he'd been holding his breath under the monsoon all this time. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to me, and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-ifs coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing the power of imagination. Goodbye everyone.